Chapter 1143. This was the first time Yu Ju had stepped onto the stage in all the battles that had taken place during the Yellow River Gathering. It wasn't that he couldn't control the battle from below the stage. Rather, he wanted to ensure the safety of the two Tianjiao and grasp the details of the battle. He wanted to be responsible for the Yellow River Gathering and establish his authority. From this, one could see how intense the battle between Dou Zhao and Yung Ganzuan had been. Who won and who lost? This was the question that all the spectators were waiting for the answer to. On the stage, Yung Ganzuan's white robes fluttered in the wind. He was already exhausted beyond recognition, and his body emitted a foul stench. He was barely hanging on to life. Dou Zhao, who was wearing a gold-trimmed red martial robe, wasn't much better off either. The sun, moon, and star tricycle blade had already sliced through half of his neck, and he had almost been decapitated. Specks of golden light scattered around his body. His battle-golden body had already been shattered. A clear light that contained an extremely strong vitality enveloped both Yung Ganzuan and Dou Zhao. Yu Ju stood between the two of them. He didn't announce the result of the battle, as if he couldn't decide the victor. He frowned and observed for a while. Then, he raised his head and bowed to the Dharma idols of Emperor Qi and Emperor Chu. I thought that since these two Tianjiao were evenly matched, it should be considered a draw. I wonder if the two emperors agree? With his strength, it wasn't difficult for him to see that Dou Zhao and Yung Ganzuan were in a situation of certain death. If no external force intervened, they would have perished together. That was why he'd acted decisively and saved both of them. This was his responsibility as the host of the Yellow River Gathering. If he really didn't do anything, he would be held accountable for it. Even if he didn't do anything, the two Dharma idols wouldn't just sit by and watch these two Tianjiao die. However, when both sides were in a situation of certain death, the only criterion to determine the outcome of the battle was which of the two would die first. But even a Dao-favored expert couldn't make a convincing statement. Because of the speed of death, there were too many things that were involved. It wasn't just about injuries, lifespan, body, and even luck. It was also about two people's willpower, perseverance, and endurance. In order to convince everyone, the only way was to let the results continue until one side really died. But at that time, the other person would not be able to be saved. The Deva's 5 Decay, powered by the Dojang Golden Body, and the Lunisolar Tri-Wheel Saber, were truly impressive. These two young men were at the top of the Yellow River gatherings in all the previous years. Today, they met on a narrow path. He didn't know if it was a blessing or a misfortune. As the host of the Yellow River Gathering, he could only call it a draw. Instead, the authority to decide the outcome of the battle would be given to the emperors of Qi and Chu. If the two supreme martial artists felt that the outcome of this battle was more important, they could make a bet and see whose fate was stronger between their own Tianjiao and the other party's Tianjiao. Only an instant had passed, but to the two supreme beings, it was long enough. The purple dragon robe fluttered slightly, and the voice that was as deep as the sea and as majestic as a mountain, majestic and unstoppable, sounded, "So be it." The indescribably noble and majestic voice that seemed to be born supreme said, "Kind words." Thus, the outcome of this round was decided. It was only at this moment that people suddenly realized one thing. Wei Nation's Tianjiao seemed to be going for the championship. It wasn't unprecedented for a country other than the 6 great overlords to fight for the championship in the Yellow River Gathering's outer pavilion or inner pavilion. Although it was rare, there had been a few cases. But there had never been a situation like this, where the two top Tianjiao fought until they were on the verge of death. It seemed like they were unable to participate in the final battle to determine the championship. As a result, the winner of the other round of the semifinals had no opponent at this time. Since Dou Zhao and Yung Ganzuan were tied, any one of them could determine the final result if they fought Yin Xiaofei. But in their current state, there was no possibility of them immediately fighting again. Using external forces to help them recover didn't conform to the rules of the Yellow River Gathering. So, Yin Xiaofei was the champion of the outer pavilion? This question arose in many people's minds. Yes, this was a problem. It wasn't a result that was recognized. Because after witnessing the exceptional battle between Dou Zhao and Yun Genzuan at the outer pavilion, no one thought that Yin Xiaofei was qualified to be the champion of the outer pavilion based on his current strength. In terms of the rules, the direction of the final result seemed to be very obvious. Just like what Jing Nation's Governor Xiahou Lai said, luck was also a kind of strength. But Wei Nation wasn't Jing Nation after all. Dou Zhao and Yun Genzuan, the two Tianjiao's strength was clearly superior to the others. Who would believe in this champion? It didn't matter if there was a dispute. The problem was that there was no dispute. Yin Xiaofei's current performance was certainly worthy of the title of Tianjiao. He had defeated Jing Nation's Tianjiao's Zhongshan Wei Sun, and that was a real battle record. But his performance in these few battles was indeed inferior to Dou Zhao and Yun Genzuan. This was an indisputable fact. Since ancient times, there was no lack of controversy among the world's champions. But in this world, was there a champion who was obviously weaker than the others? Now, everyone's eyes were on Yin Xiaofei, including Yu Qian, who was still carefully protecting Dou Zhao and Yun Genzuan. No matter what, as the host of this Yellow River gathering, he had to announce the results. At this moment, Yin Xiaofei was below the stage. After defeating Zhongshan Wei Sun, he simply treated his injuries and sat below the stage. He watched the entire battle between Dou Zhao and Yun Genzuan. The jade bracelet on his hair had been destroyed in the previous battle, so his hair was now draped over his shoulders. The heaviness when he used the sword to pick the red lotus, the joy when he used Su Jinhuan, the sadness when he used the divine injury sword technique. None of these were reflected in his current expression. He was quiet and serious. I came to the Yellow River gathering to compete with the heroes of the world. Even if I have to burn my body, I'm willing to be the champion. This was not an exaggeration. When he fought with Zhongshan Wei Sun, he was already fighting with his life on the line. Yin Xiaofei looked deeply at Dou Zhao and Yun Genzuan, then cupped his hands at Yu Qian and said, "Today, after witnessing such a peerless battle, I know how big the world is. I don't dare to compete for the champion." He sighed. This I was calm and heroic. Then, I'll be the third in the world. He felt that he had a clear conscience about this decision, but he still needed an explanation from the Wei Nation. Therefore, he turned around and bowed deeply to the Wei Nation's General Wu Sun. He took off the scabbard from his waist, held it in front of him with both hands, and pushed it gently. Before the battle, I made an agreement with His Majesty to bring back the champion for the Wei Nation. His Majesty bestowed me with pride and encouraged me to leave. Now that I'm inferior, I don't dare to claim to be the champion. Since the agreement is broken, I'll return this sword to you. The sword flew back to Wu Sun with its scabbard. Yin Xiaofei turned around and left just like that. He left the champion of the world at his fingertips behind. He left such a famous sword behind. He also left everyone's gazes, exclamations, and discussions behind. He wasn't a subject of the Wei Nation and didn't serve the king. He was just a wanderer of the Wei Nation. Therefore, he had his own pride and freedom. He had his own choices and paths. Only when he reached the entrance to the south, the Wei Nation's General Wu Sun pushed with his palm. The sword flew out and crossed the distance easily. It hung on Yin Xiaofei's waist again without a trace. Wu Sun said, "There's no reason to take back the sword bestowed by the emperor. Although you're not the #1 champion in the world, you're the #1 pride of the Wei Nation. Who else can this sword be other than you? It's a long journey to the mountains. Always think of your country and friends. Don't forget this sword and this heart." Yin Xiaofei stopped in his tracks and bowed to Wu Sun. He didn't say anything else. He held the sword with one hand and strode away. Hearing their conversation, everyone knew that Yin Xiaofei was going to leave the Wei Nation after this battle. No one knew where he was going and what he was going to do. He was really a person with a lot of stories. Great! Someone cheered loudly. All of a sudden, the ring-shaped spectator stands erupted in cheers. It was for Yin Xiaofei's self-control. He didn't fight for the championship and left with his sword. It was also for Wu Sun to give the sword to a hero. Of course, different people had different levels of thinking. Yin Xiaofei chose to leave with his sword. Perhaps he had other considerations, or perhaps it was just his own pride that made him do so. He was the only one who knew the reason behind this. However, to the Wei nation, this was undoubtedly an extremely wise move. Among all the Tianjiao in this Yellow River meet, Dou Zhao and Yung Gunzuan were completely unique. They surpassed the other Tianjiao. Apart from them, no one else was qualified to reach the top. They fought until they almost perished together. If the Tianjiao of the Wei nation came to take the championship, who would be convinced? No one would be convinced. No one in the world would be convinced. Then, could the Wei nation, which wasn't one of the top 6 in the world, hold the benefits that this championship represented? They didn't have the strength to fight for the championship at all, but they did in the end. That was not worthy of the title. As the saying goes, if one's virtue is not worthy of the title, there will be disasters. Yin Xiaofei winning the championship under such circumstances was a disaster, not a blessing. Therefore, when he left with his sword, Wu Sun gladly accepted it. Although Yin Xiaofei had made an agreement with the Wei nation's emperor to win the championship, the Wei nation's officials didn't actually expect that. In fact, their bottom line was to enter the main competition. They were only looking forward to entering the top 8. It was already a surprise that Yin Xiaofei was in the top 4 of the outer arena. In order to safely obtain the corresponding resources, he had to prepare well. Now that he had even given up on the championship, who would have the nerve to make things difficult for the top 4 resources? As for Wu Sun and Yin Xiaofei, the Riverview platform was not only a meeting of Tianjiao, but also a meeting of countries. Tianjiao was not the only one fighting for the championship. Why were there so many geniuses who were willing to risk their lives for this short battle? Why were there so many geniuses who were willing to risk their lives for this battle? Because they represented not only themselves, but also the countries behind them. Sometimes, honor was more important than victory. Therefore, Yu Nations by Yu Xiao was unwilling to pick up a spot in the main competition. Therefore, the dignified, perfected person, Chao Jie, deliberately made things difficult for Tanpian. It wasn't that he made things difficult for Tanpian or the great Xia nation. Wu Sun was the great general of Wei nation. Of course, he understood this principle. He had to protect Wei nation's reputation at all times. Not to mention that it was just a sword that he was proud of. Even if there were 10 famous swords of the age, he would give them away when it was time to do so. He wouldn't even frown. When Yin Xiaofei's figure disappeared outside the 6 directions pillar, only then did people realize that a new problem had appeared. Who would be the champion of the outer arena of the Yellow River meeting this time? The only one who had won the right to compete was Yin Xiaofei, who claimed to be 3rd in the world. Without a doubt, the first place would be between Dou Zhao and Yung Gunzuan. To a certain extent, Dou Zhao and Yung Gunzuan represented 2 extremes. They were 2 completely different types of Tianjiao. Dou Zhao only had 1 divine ability seed and 1 battle golden body. However, he had developed it to the extreme. With his outstanding combat talent, he had mastered the 7 battle styles. His saber technique was divine, and he had condensed the Tao of battle. He had achieved the combat strength of the outer arena of Tianjiao. Yung Gunzuan, on the other hand, represented the highest achievement of the divine ability inner mansion. He had the divine ability seed from the 5 mansions. He had developed each divine ability to the extreme. With this, he became the top Tianjiao. After entering the outer mansion, he also had the combat strength of the outer mansion. In terms of divine ability, no matter how strong the battle golden body was, it couldn't be compared to Yung Gunzuan's divine ability seed from the 5 mansions. In terms of fists, legs, and weapons, Yung Gunzuan and Dou Zhao couldn't be compared at all. Although his sun wheel smashing technique was stable, accurate, and ruthless, it couldn't be compared to the top Tianjiao. The fist of the 5 divine abilities was strong because of the path of Tao and the light of 5 divine abilities. His saber technique, which he was best at, couldn't reach Gan Chang'en's level. It was only under the activation of the delirium divine ability, the control of the sun, moon, and star tri-wheel blade, and Chongshuan's strength that it could be as terrifying as the 5 decay of heaven and man. Both of them had done their best in their respective fields. Looking at all the performances in the outer mansion, They could be said to be evenly matched. Whether it was their fighting will or fighting talent, there was nothing to be picky about. In the one-on-one confrontation, they had fought to the last moment and ended in a tie. However, there was no second place in martial arts. How could there be a tie in the world? Yu Qian didn't think for long. He saved Do Zhao, who was almost decapitated, and Yung Gunzuan, who was about to collapse. He dispersed the clear light and stood with his hands behind his back. He said to the crowd, Yin Xiaofei voluntarily gave up the competition and was willing to be third. Then, Qi's Yung Gunzuan and Chu's Do Zhao will be tied for second place in the outer mansion of the Yellow River meeting. This year's outer mansion has no winner. This was a somewhat regretful result, but it was also in line with the rules. As the host of the Yellow River meeting, Yu Qian only needed to be responsible for the rules of the Yellow River meeting. In fact, purely based on the rules, Do Zhao and Yung Gunzuan had already lost. It was only because the people of Wei knew when to advance and when to retreat that such a result occurred. In an event like the Yellow River meeting, it was even more impossible to wait for Do Zhao and Yung Gunzuan to recover from their injuries before fighting. Yu Qian's words were the final result. After he finished speaking, he looked around and said, "Tomorrow is the intermansion competition." Then, he turned around and disappeared from the martial arts arena. On the martial arts arena, Do Zhao and Yung Gunzuan each lay on one side, both of them on the verge of death. Based on the rules of the Yellow River meeting, Yu Qian saved their lives, but he couldn't spend a lot of energy to completely heal their injuries. This was a matter between Qi and Chu. Of course, there was no need for anyone to rush them. Today, Yung Gunzuan and Do Zhao's performance had undoubtedly won everyone's respect. Their futures were also expected to be dazzling, and they were the treasures of their respective countries. Almost as soon as Yu Qian left, the experts of Qi and Chu rushed up to the martial arts arena. The commander of the Qi's Spring Death Army, Chao Jia, carried Yung Gunzuan down the martial arts arena, while the commander of Chu's Evil Mask Army, Wu Shi, treated Do Zhao on the martial arts arena. In short, each was more important than the other. Of course, Wu Shi quickly left with Do Zhao, because Xian Nanke went up and said that they had to hurry up and determine the last person in the intermansion competition. However, after the prodigy battle of the Outer Tower had ended, not many people paid attention to the Outer Tower selection. Having already seen the most splendid scenery, it was really hard to raise one's interest in the intermansion arena selection when they turned back to watch it. Even Zhang Wang got up and left his seat, intending to recuperate and prepare for tomorrow's competition. At some point in time, the 6 Supreme Dharma appearances that stood side by side with the Pillars of 6 Directions had also disappeared. Looking around, the Pillars of 6 Directions still looked hazy between them, and they couldn't see clearly. As for Mr. A.O., he was no longer there, and only the luxurious chair was empty. It was like a piece of white paper in a dream. On the other hand, when Yung Gunzuan was carried down the martial arts arena by Chao Jia, a group of concerned people immediately swarmed over from Qi. There were many people from Qi who came to watch the competition, such as Cheng Gongsheng and Li Longchuan. At this moment, they couldn't help but worry about their own country, Tianjiao. They were proud and worried at the same time. Wang Yiwu was the first to rush to Chao Jia's side. If he didn't know Chao Jia's abilities, he would have treated him himself. Cheng Gongsheng held Yung Gunzuan's hand emotionally, his eyes brimming with tears as he said emotionally, "Brother, I will take responsibility for the family's affairs. You don't have to worry." Yung Gunzuan's injury almost healed on the spot. Chapter 1144. The Riverview platform was noisy at night. There were too many stories and history here. Only the emotions of the people who had nowhere to go scattered among the clouds and quietly flowed along with the long river. Candy figurines, candy sellers. Make one? Little Wong, your father is a good person. 2 years ago, I put 2 medicines on credit, and he hasn't asked me for them until now. I've been too ashamed to visit him, but I didn't expect. What a pity. Come. Hot mutton soup, fragrant sliced mutton. Zhang Wang felt that his mind was very light, but also very far away. Senior brother Jiang, hee, I want to ask you about swordsmanship. Not bad, junior brother Jiang. You have quite the style of me back then. Jiang Wang, since you've entered my monastery, you must remember to work hard. Your future depends on thousands of people. His soul floated, wandering to unknown places. Third brother, let's drink together. Third brother, it's time to rest. I'll call you tomorrow. Rumble. It sounded like thunder. In front of him, the ground cracked, magma gushed out. Houses collapsed, and pedestrians fled. There were cries, shouts, and hatred. Third brother. Third brother. Jiang Wang. Jiang Wang suddenly woke up and looked around. He was still on his bed, and there was no one around. So it was a dream? He hadn't dreamed for a long, long time. Almost all the nights were spent in cultivation. Tonight should be no exception. But when he thought about participating in the main competition tomorrow and competing for the title of #1 in the world, he let himself relax and have a good night's rest. But he didn't expect. In the end, he couldn't escape from this one night. On the world platform, he watched others pick red lotuses with swords and lamented the pain of self-injury. Wasn't he also carrying a heavy burden? The night outside the window was still dark, and it wasn't dawn yet. Jiang Wang simply stopped sleeping. He put on his clothes and got up, picking up the sword leaning against the bed. The scabbard made of divine dragon wood was warm to the touch. He had long been familiar with the texture, which made him feel more at ease. Holding the sword, he walked out of the door and into the courtyard. The bright moon hung high in the night sky, casting down cold, frosty light. The river viewing platform where the various countries gathered naturally wouldn't be too quiet at night. Those nobles had plenty of fun to play with. However, the restrictions in the courtyard blocked out all the noise. Jiang Wang did not intend to go anywhere else. He walked forward a few steps and stopped, standing in the middle of the courtyard. When he looked up and saw the moon, he felt like he was in a dream. The moon is as bright as before, but the person is nowhere to be seen. Someone probably sighed, but it should be in a dream. At this time, Jiang Wang was silent. He gripped the black sword hilt and pulled out a streak of frost light. The frosty light danced under the moonlight. It was neither sharp nor powerful. All the killing power and sword chi were contained within the sword, and the sound was also annihilated. But it was beautiful. She came and went like a startled swan. Her sword was like a soaring dragon. Dressed in a green robe and wielding a sword, he danced silently under the moonlight. Those surging and restless emotions gradually calmed down. The moonlight protected him, and the night comforted him. He spent one difficult night after another with the moonlight as his companion. The East Rising Purple Chi Sword Manual. The 3 swords of heaven, earth, and man. And then the human sword style. An old general in his twilight years pursued with a sword like the setting sun. When the sword came horizontally, it was the waning of a famous scholar, wantonly waving his brush. 10 years of abject poverty, fighting with life and death. When the sword was raised, it was the frivolity of youth. The sword was proud and returned calmly. The man was like duckweed, and the sword was out of his control. In the end, he looked up at the moon, and the sword fell into yearning. Since Dong A's death, he had never used the yearning sword form again. Jiang Wang sheathed his sword and ended this freehand painting. The sound of hearing drowned out all the sounds. He did not intend to disturb anyone. When the sword danced under the moonlight, it returned to the sword. It was indeed not time to rest, he thought. He returned to his room alone and began to cultivate again, as if nothing had happened. The same moonlight shone in front of a small building not far from the courtyard. At the window on the 2nd floor, Chao Jie stood with his hands behind his back. As the expert leading the team this time, his residence was very close to Tianjiao, where the 3 participants were participating. It was not only to provide shelter, but also to give advice at any time. In addition to the problem of one's own cultivation, the advice of a present-age immortal was also very precious when dealing with an opponent who had already shown his strength. Although Jiang Wang had drowned out the sound, the scene of the sword dance under the moonlight still did not escape his eyes. It was impossible to escape. Tomorrow was the official competition of the inner mansion field. Of course, he was very concerned about Jiang Wang's condition. In the competition of the outer mansion field, Yung Gunzuin was dazzling, but after all, he did not win the championship and spread the flag for the country. Of course, Ji Xiaonan was also extremely talented, but this time, the Jing state was too confident and imposing. After all, it was the most powerful country in the world with the longest history. No matter how confident he was in Ji Xiaonan, he could not underestimate Chongjing. After all, Jiang Wang was more likely to win the championship. Speaking of which, has the last place of the inner mansion field been decided? Chao Jie was still looking at the courtyard and suddenly asked. In the shadow behind him, a voice said, "By Yu Xia of the Yu State." As many people expected, Bai Yuxia indeed won the last place of the official competition. The result did not seem to have changed, but in the process, the self-confident and high-spirited image of the Yu state was established. For Bai Yuxia himself, it was undoubtedly a kind of perfection. Of course, under Chao Jie's intentional highlighting, Tianjiao of the Yu state advanced to the official competition in this way, which made the Tianjiao of the Xia state look even more embarrassed. That Taiyu, is there still no specific information? Chao Jie asked again. I'm incompetent, the voice in the shadow said. Chao Jie raised his hand. It's not the fault of fighting. After a pause, he said again, let's see what the Jing state is hiding. This time the problem is big. He took one last look at the small courtyard where Jiang Wang lived and reached out to close the window. In the dark room, he said, now you go and do something. Moonlight was not stingy to everyone. Whether you were from the inner mansion or Dongzhen, whether you were Jiang Wang or Lin Zhengren. In the courtyard of the Zhuang state, under the moonlight, Du Ruhui casually performed a Dao technique. If Huang Su uses this technique to attack you, what will you do? Lin Zhengren thought seriously and said, I will first use the wall flow technique to deflect the force. No. Du Ruhui shook his head and said, I need your first reaction. I will avoid it. Lin Zhengren said, this is not the best choice. Du Ruhui explained in detail. Because of the special nature of this technique, almost none of the experts who led the team to the Yellow River meeting would mind giving pointers to their own Tianjiao. But probably no one was as detailed as Du Ruhui. He accompanied him as the state minister. From Yong State's Beigong Ku, Liang State's Huang Su, Snow State's Ya Ai, Wei State's Dongguo Bao, Shun State's Jiang Shaohua. He analyzed all the possible opponents that he might encounter one by one. He taught Lin Zhengren how to deal with the battle step by step and perfected different countermeasures. Unknowingly, the East was already white. Chapter 1145. On the 12th day of the 7th month, it was still a sunny day. During the Battle of the Yellow River, it was impossible for there to be any bad weather. The Pillar of Six Directions still towered into the sky, and the people of the various countries filed in. The six Dharma appearances of the six supreme beings descended, towering over the heavens. The Lord of Mount Yujing, Yu Qian, appeared to host the competition, and Mr. Ao also sat down again. Everything was the same as yesterday, except that Tianjiao was now in the inner mansion stage. Jiang Wang was still sitting in the front row. Chidi's friends were all sitting not far behind him. The words of encouragement had already been said, and no one came to disturb him. Yi Ling Xiao and his daughter were sitting in the northwest spectator stand, whispering something. He was following Jinren Ye's instructions, and had been deceiving himself in front of Du Ruhui, pretending not to know him. Yung Ginzuan also came today and sat beside him. After a night of treatment, although he still looked very weak, he was no longer in danger. In short, the scenery was as good as before, and a good time awaited the song. Jiang Wang held his sword horizontally across his knees, his hands resting lightly on the sword, and sat silently. When it came to the days of cultivation, he had started since he was young. Only those disciples of the famous sects had been nurtured under the guidance of strong cultivators since young, and increased the chances of successfully opening their meridians. All the mantras, secret techniques, and even experiences had the most suitable arrangements. And Jiang Wang relied on his own hard work, starting from mortal martial arts, to temper his body bit by bit. He officially opened his meridians on the 15th day of the 6th month. year 3917, and succeeded in becoming a transcendent. It had been more than 2 years since then. Before becoming a transcendent, he had never slacked off, regardless of the weather. There was no need to mention how many difficulties there were. From the moment he returned from the West Mountain, bathed in blood, he would never forget. In these 2 years after becoming a transcendent, he had experienced too much. So many difficulties, so much pain, so many moments of despair. But no matter when or where, he had never given up. No matter what he faced, he had never given up on himself. He had searched for hope in despair and opened up a path of survival in the midst of despair. Along the way, every day, every moment, he had been moving forward unswervingly. Then today, it was time to verify all of this. Today, everyone was watching. Today, the Tianjiao of the various countries had gathered on the river viewing platform. Today, he and Changxiangxi had been waiting for a long time. The world should be waiting for a name called Jianghua. Sharpening a sword in a box for 10 years. It should be called the world knows the splendor of frost. Unlike the eagerness of the past few days, the Sauvignon Blanc was surprisingly quiet today. It didn't even make a single sound. It probably knew that it could bloom to its heart's content today. There were still 8 arenas, which were divided into A, B, C, D, E, G, and X. After each round, they would merge once. 8 and 4, 4 and 1. The true Lord Yuju stood on the stage. His voice transmitted to everyone's ears. Today is the Intermansion Arena's official competition. 16 Tianjiao will compete for first place. Please prepare. The light screen unfurled like a picture scroll, and the names of the 16 Intermansion realm experts from Tianjiao flickered like stars on the light screen. Every name on the list represented a chosen of a nation and was one of the most outstanding individuals in the Intermansion who had stood out from tens of thousands of others. However, only one person would be able to take first place. The extremely short time it took for the names to change was especially long in the anxious wait. When the names on the light screen finally stopped, many people let out a long sigh of relief. The list of opponents had been confirmed, and there was no possibility of change. Huang Shelley from Tianjiao of Jing Kingdom against Yelu Ji from Liao Kingdom. Xiang Bei from Tianjiao of Chu Kingdom against Bai Yuxia from Tianjiao of Yu Kingdom. Qin Jizhan from Tianjiao of Qin Kingdom against Xiao Shu from Tianjiao of Dan Kingdom. The Intermansion realm expert from Mu Kingdom, Tianjiao, probably received the most attention. His name was Deng Qi, and it was said that he came from the Yuan clan. However, there was no more specific information. His opponent was Yin Wenhua from Tianjiao of Song Kingdom. He didn't choose a relatively weak opponent, as many people expected. Instead, he chose a regional power like Song Kingdom, which highlighted the confidence of a hegemon. The 16 Intermansion realm experts from Tianjiao all had different expressions as they looked at the light screen. Some were calm and certain, some were full of confidence, and some were full of fighting spirit. However, none of them had an expression as complicated as Lin Jingren's at this moment. It was the kind of facial expression that was controlled with amazing willpower and the eyes that were filled with violent changes of emotions. It was mixed and conflicting, giving people a very contradictory and complicated impression. He was originally elegant and calm, sitting at the front of the preparation area with the mentality that if he could improve, it would be a good thing. If he couldn't, it would still be glorious. Among the 16 countries that were listed in the Yellow River meet, Zhuang Kingdom was the least likely to make it. He had already achieved the best result in the history of Zhuang Kingdom, and Zhuang Kingdom's only request for him was to show his elegance. Compared to the other 15 from Tianjiao, he should have a psychological advantage. Moreover, he had carefully studied the few opponents that he might encounter and prepared more than one set of countermeasures. It wasn't necessarily impossible for him to improve. However, the light screen showed that Lin Jingren's opponent was Jiang Wang from Tianjiao of Qi Kingdom. In contrast, Jiang Xiaohua from Shun Kingdom breathed a sigh of relief. On the surface, Jiang Xiaohua from Tianjiao of Xia Kingdom looked determined to take revenge for his country. He also thought that he would definitely be selected by Tianjiao of Qi Kingdom and was prepared to fight for his life. However, at this moment, his eyes were obviously relaxed. Of course, some people couldn't help but laugh secretly. The Qi nation's prodigy didn't target the Xian nation or the Shin nation. Instead, he chose the Zhuang nation's prodigy, who was relatively weaker on paper among the top 16. Wasn't this a sign of his lack of confidence? However, Ji Xiaonan and Yung Genzuan's performances were too dazzling, which made these people more cautious about Jiang Wang's strength. For the time being, they didn't dare to express their opinions. As for Jiang Wang himself, his expression was calm and his eyes were calm. He just made the choice he wanted to make. What others thought of him had nothing to do with him. He got up and left his seat. He politely said hello to Chao Jie, Ji Xiaonan, and Yung Genzuan. Then he exchanged glances with several friends in the stands. Then he put his hand on his long sword, walked down the stands, and walked to the Gung martial arts arena. He held his head high and walked calmly, as if he was strolling in his own courtyard. He got along with the flowers and trees he was familiar with without any tension or uneasiness. Those who watched him could feel an indescribable sense of beauty when he walked. That was the ethereal charm brought by the immortal technique, one step to heaven. Stepping on the air and stepping on the void is like walking on flat ground. Now, when he walked on flat ground, he felt like an immortal, but only in Lin Zhengren's sight. He felt that his opponent's footsteps were very heavy. Every step he took was stepping on his heartbeat. He sat in the stands and watched the familiar figure, who often appeared in his nightmares, walk down the stands and walk to the martial arts arena step by step. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of his heartbeat was so clear. He began to find it difficult to breathe. From a moment he saw the list of opponents, he found it difficult to breathe. It was as if there was an invisible hand tightly clenching his heart. Because with his intelligence, it was easy for him to understand why he was matched up against Jiang Wang. There was a voice in his heart that was shouting, "He wants to kill me. He wants to kill me." On the martial arts arena of the Yellow River meeting, under the watch of the true monarch, Jiang Wang wanted to kill him. Chapter 1146. Lin Zhengren sat in the preparation area with his hands on his knees. He sat upright. Amidst the crowd of prodigies who were leaving their seats, he appeared to be the calmest and most composed. It was as if he was unaffected by anything. But his hands, which were pressed on his knees, were almost pinched into his bones. His legs were as heavy as lead, and he could not move. This was the Yellow River Gathering, the gathering of the winds and clouds. It was the place where the various countries competed and the stars shone in the sky. Lin Zhengren was also in his prime. How could he not want to show off and become famous? Even if he disregarded all these, if he could shine in an occasion like the Yellow River Gathering, the benefits for his future would be immeasurable. And regardless of how much support Zhuanggua could provide, the host of the Yellow River Gathering was the true lord of Mount Yujing. If he could perform well in front of Yu Qian and display his talents, he would not have to worry about not having a chance to cultivate at Mount Yujing. For this, he was willing to fight. The night when the entire Lin clan died in Wangjiang City, was it not for a moment like today? Every day that he came to the river viewing platform, he was studying his opponent. Last night, he discussed with Du Ruhui and did not rest. He gave his all, so of course, he wanted to perform well. But Jiang Wang, Lin Zhengren wanted to stand up a few times, but he pushed himself back down. Beside his ear, Minister Du Ruhui communicated with him. Later, if you feel that something is wrong, admit defeat and leave the stage. Compared to victory, your safety is more important. Even at this time, he did not forget to perform Minister. Lin Zhengren was silent. He was very clear that with Du Ruhui's intelligence, Du Ruhui would be able to think of what he could think of. He probably thought that Jiang Wang's determination to kill was purely to target Zhuanggua. But he could not help but understand that he had a blood feud with Jiang Wang. He put the blood debt of the entire Lin clan on Jiang Wang. Then, between him and Jiang Wang, one of them had to die. The question was, who would die? If something is wrong, admit defeat. This was a good strategy. But would Jiang Wang not think of it? Lin Zhengren repeatedly asked in his heart. As the representative of Qi in Tianjiao, he gave up on trying to beat down Xia and Shun, and specifically came to me. How much did he pay? Did he not think that I would prioritize my life on the court? He clearly knew that I would prioritize my own life. He clearly knew that true monarch Yu Ju would do his best to protect Tianjiao's life in the main competition. But he still chose to do so. He was certain that he could kill me. Tianjiao of Liaoning province, please enter. True monarch Yu Mu's voice reached everyone's ears. But in fact, the 15 Tianjiao had already left their seats and walked towards the martial arts arena. Only Lin Zhengren was still sitting in the preparation area. It looked like he was deliberately asking everyone to wait for him. A mere genius from a small country. Isn't that a bit too rude? Lin Zhengren even heard someone complaining like this. He didn't bother to find out whose voice it was. Any country that could come to the Riverview platform wouldn't be afraid of the Zhuang kingdom. He was only asking himself over and over again, what did Jiang Wang rely on? Would I be able to withstand it? He realized that he didn't have an answer. To be able to become the #1 Tianjiao of Intermansion in a hegemon country like Qi, he couldn't accurately judge what kind of methods Tianjiao had. Once again, Lin Zhengren clearly understood the limitations of being born in a small country. The strongest Intermansion realm cultivator he had seen up close was Tianjiao's Jiang Liming of Shun Kingdom. He simply couldn't imagine what the Intermansion realm cultivator of a hegemon country like Tianjiao was like. Originally, he could have gotten to know a little in the first round of the main competition, but the first round was Qi's Jiang Wang. He didn't have an answer. Lin Zhengren didn't want to admit it, but he had to admit that the unknown deepened his fear. It wasn't that he didn't dare to risk his life, but he didn't want to walk towards the end that others had planned for him. He had worked so hard to get to where he was now, and the only reason that could make him risk his life was himself. It wasn't about the honor of the country or the favor of the emperor or master. Zhengren, Du Ruhui's voice sounded in his ears. The Prime Minister Zhuang Kingdom had already sensed that something was wrong. He hadn't encountered any of the opponents that he had studied so hard last night. Of course, he could see Jiang Wang's killing intent towards Lin Zhengren from the list of opponents. He could also understand Lin Zhengren's fear. After he supported Lin Zhengren to go on stage, he would give his strongest performance and admit defeat. But he could not even go on the martial arts practice platform. In the history of the Yellow River Conference's main competition, no one had ever admitted defeat. At least, Du Ruhui had never heard of it. They had all fought to the last moment, burned all their talent, and displayed all their efforts before accepting the result of victory or defeat. If he didn't even dare to stand on the stage, the Zhuang Kingdom's face would be completely lost. If he was thrown in front of more than 100 countries at the conference, they wouldn't be able to pick it up. At this moment, he spoke. It was a kind of relief, but also a kind of urging. He comforted Lin Zhengren not to be afraid. Perfected cultivator Yu Mu was watching over him. He urged Lin Zhengren not to lose face for the country. Lin Zhengren didn't respond. He looked at Jiang Wang. At this moment, Jiang Wang. He had already stepped onto the martial arts practice platform G. He was wearing a green robe and holding a sword. He stood with his head held high. Among the 15 Tianjiao who had all stepped onto the stage, he had his own unique demeanor. That pair of clear and calm eyes were casually cast over. Please enlighten me, the guy named Jiang Wang said with a smile. He was calm, certain, and confident. On the preparation table, Lin Zhengren spat out a mouthful of blood. Jiang Wang's smile. It destroyed the last bit of his courage that was still struggling. Minister of State. Lin Zhengren shouted in horror. My blood ghost backfired. Before he could finish his words, he screamed and fainted. Blood flowed out of his 7 orifices. There were so many experts and smart people present. Pretending to be injured couldn't fool anyone. Therefore, he had really been backfired by the blood ghost. He had let go of all his control over the blood ghost and intensified its crazy instincts, causing the blood ghost to backfire on its master at the first moment. This meant he had given up on the blood ghost that he had painstakingly nurtured for so long. The amount of resources he had used to nurture this blood ghost up until now, was incalculable. He had used such a painful price to achieve this performance. He only wanted to live. On the basis of living, he wanted to eliminate the negative effects as much as possible. He had already fainted due to the backfire of his injuries. He couldn't be considered coward. This was the best method he could think of in a short amount of time. Du Ruhui pressed his palm on Lin Jingren's head and instantly destroyed the raging blood ghost. He single-handedly held the seriously injured and fainted Lin Jingren. He seemed to have aged a lot. He looked at perfected Lord Yuqian tiredly and said, "Please forgive me. Lin Jingren of the Zhuang Kingdom has been backfired by the blood ghost and is powerless to enter the stage. He can only forfeit the battle." There was a moment just now when he almost wanted to kill Lin Jingren with his palm. He had high hopes for this young man, but he didn't expect him to be so timid and cowardly at such a critical moment. Of course, he knew that there was no possibility of the blood ghost backfiring. Last night, he had accompanied Lin Jingren to deliberate on the battle plan for the entire night. But how could he be willing to let the Zhuang Kingdom become the laughingstock of the world? Perhaps it was already the laughingstock. But no matter what, he had to salvage the situation a little. Therefore, he immediately cooperated with him. Yu Qian didn't even look in Zhuang Guo's direction. He didn't comment on this. Du Ruhui and Lin Jingren's performance could fool others, but it couldn't fool a perfected lord. But although he didn't comment, another voice sounded, "Since that's the case, bring him to recuperate." There was no emotion in the voice. It was very calm. But this voice was grand and vast, as if it was spreading a great will to the entire modern world. It was Emperor Jing's voice. Du Ruhui's heart sank into the abyss. Chapter 1147. Since the start of the competition, other than the time when Yu Qie asked Yung Gunzuin about the outcome of the battle, the six Supremes had been watching in silence. Their Dharma manifestations had descended on the Riverview platform based on tradition. They were watching the battle in Tianjiao as Supremes. They were only onlookers and would never interfere with the process of the competition. Only now did Emperor Jing take the initiative to speak. Of the six Supremes present, Emperor Jing had a reason to be angry. The Zhuang Kingdom was a Taoist vassal state and was ruled by him in name. His own inner mansion cultivator, Tianjiao, had died behind the Gate of Demons. Nominally, he had forfeited the competition. The first Taoist vassal state, Tianjiao, had left the competition early because of Lin Jingren's meticulous plan. In other words, the Zhuang Kingdom was the only Taoist vassal state left in the inner mansion competition. Now, Lin Jingren had admitted defeat without even entering the arena, or the entire Taoist vassal state hide their face. If that was all, Emperor Jing might not have spoken. As noble as he was, he naturally had the capacity to tolerate the world. A mere inner mansion level matter shouldn't have much impact. But what was the Yellow River Gathering? It was a gathering of Tianjiao vassal states. Traditionally, it was also a gathering of the human race on the Riverview platform. Since ancient times, the human race had shown their wisdom, courage, and future here in Tianjiao. It was to intimidate the Changhe water tribe. Now Lord Changhe was seated. What did the Zhuang Kingdom show? Cowardice? Cowardice? How could you run away without fighting and lose without fighting? Although the laughable trick of biting off more than you can chew could deceive most of the people present, how could it escape Lord Changhe's eyes? Lin Jingren wasn't the only one who had lost face. At least the two of them knew how to cover it up. Otherwise, Emperor Jing would have killed them on the spot. His words were calm, but his attitude was clear. Now, he gave Du Ruhui a choice. To be honest, the participants had already fainted, and the one who admitted defeat was Du Ruhui. So this was not the final result. Those who had fainted could be woken up, those who had suffered injuries could be healed, and Du Ruhui's words of abandoning the competition could be taken back. Of course, Du Ruhui understood that Emperor Jing was giving Zhuang Guo a chance to make up for his mistakes. With his intelligence, he naturally knew that he should seize this opportunity. As a Taoist vassal state, if they offended Emperor Jing, would there be any good consequences? But the precondition for making up for it was he who could control Lin Zhongrun. After he cured Lin Zhongrun, he made Lin Zhongrun stand bravely on the martial arts stage and perform. Although he suffered a backlash, he did not retreat. He used his life for the Tianjiao, for the Zhuang state, and even exaggeratedly for the entire Tianjiao of the human race on the river viewing platform, to win back the face that he had personally lost. But could he do it? If it was before today, Du Ruhui could still say that he had some confidence. However, today, Lin Zhongrun had decisively injured himself to avoid the battle. It was under his comfort and urging that he made the decisive decision. Now, it was time for Du Ruhui to make a choice. He was silent for a moment. As if he did not understand anything, he picked up the unconscious Lin Zhongrun, lowered his head, and hurriedly left the spectator area. He walked out of the world platform. That was his answer. He told Emperor Jing that he was too ashamed to face him. As the Prime Minister of Zhuangguo, he could not control the Tianjiao that represented Zhuangguo. In order to not lose more face, he could only maintain the lie. Then, he really went down to recuperate. This was an accident. Just like many times in the past, Du Ruhui was like a diligent tinkerer. He always did his best to repair every aspect of the country. At first, he thought that this trip to the Yellow River was just a formality. Then, there was an unexpected surprise. It seemed that he could bear the glory. In the blink of an eye, it became an illusion. He still had to repair it. However, not all the loopholes could be repaired. Not all mistakes could be made up for. Du Ruhui was a rare prime minister in Zhuangguo. Looking at the world, the things that he could do were very limited. Today, he had a new understanding of Lin Zhongrun. He was able to give up on the competition in such an occasion. He did not think that he could make Lin Zhongrun fight with his life on the stage. If he forced Lin Zhongrun onto the stage after he woke up, that would be even more embarrassing. For Zhuangguo, it was like tearing off the last fig leaf. The fig leaf that Lin Zhongrun used to kill himself before he fainted. He could only choose the lesser of two evils. Even if he won the resources for the top 16, more places for the monster race, and more meridian unlocking pills, he could forget about it. He could only do so. Lin Zhongrun had to be really injured from the backlash. He had to really faint and not cower in fear. In this way, he could also mention the Tianjiao of Shangguo. He could say that Jiang Limeng was too strong and that it was difficult for him to recover. Or else, in front of the representatives of more than 100 countries, Zhuangguo's face was lost again and again. Now that Emperor Jing was angry, the only thing he could do was to keep a low profile. He wanted to minimize Zhuangguo's presence and minimize this incident. Arguing was useless. Explaining was even more futile. The punishment could only be endured. It was Du Ruhui's fault for choosing the wrong person at the Yellow River meeting. The entire world stage fell into an eerie silence after Emperor Jing's words. Many people did not know the inside story. They did not understand why Emperor Jing would speak. He actually cared about the Tianjiao of a weak Taoist vassal state. Was it because the Taoist vassals had been wiped out in the inner palace? The other group of people lowered their heads in fear and trepidation, not daring to think too much. After all, the grace of the heavens was unpredictable. However, there were many smart people. Deng Qi of Tianjiao, who was wearing a thick bronze mask, looked at Du Ruhui's back with a meaningful gaze. Of course, he knew Lin Zhongrun. During the Dao debate of the three cities, Lin Zhongrun had been very impressive. He had suppressed the students of the same level. He had stepped on Fu Baosong, beaten up Zhang Linchuan, opened the heaven and earth gate, and made Sun Xiaoman vomit blood. Later, when third brother Jiang went to the Lin family in Wangjiang City, he had prepared a plan. In the end, he had suppressed this person until he was speechless. At that time, he felt that this person was cautious enough. He did not lack shrewdness, but he was too timid. His future was very limited. He had only noticed this person on the Riverview platform when he was looking at the participant list. He was quite surprised. He knew very well why Qi's Tianjiao had chosen the Zhuang state to participate in the Tianjiao battle. But he really didn't expect that Lin Zhongrun would be able to throw up blood and give up on the competition in this kind of situation where the heavenly talents of the various countries are competing and everyone has to be first. Unlike the other people who had seen through his trick and were full of disdain, he thought highly of him because of this. Not everyone could be so decisive. However, that was all. He did not care about the Zhuang state. He did not care about Lin Zhengren at all. What made him reconsider was that third brother Jiang had unknowingly gained such a terrifying deterrent force. He could force his opponent to give up before the battle even started. Deng Qi casually glanced at Qi's Tianjiao. Then, he looked back at his opponent, Yin Wenhua from the Tianjiao of the Song country, who had already stepped onto the platform. Now, he also had his own path to walk. In the Battle of the Yellow River, he was no longer just a bystander. Yu Qian's voice sounded at this moment. The winner of the Gung martial arts practice platform is Qi's Jiang Wang. Congratulations. He looked at Jiang Wang and said lightly, "You are the fastest Tianjiao to win in history. This record is unprecedented, and it will be difficult to surpass it in the future." As a perfected cultivator, Yu Qian's words were full of resentment. Of course, it was not directed at Jiang Wang. In his opinion, Zhuang State's Lin Zhengren was extremely cowardly. His cowardice was an insult to Yu Qian. Am I, a perfected cultivator, not enough to protect your life? Do you need to hurt yourself to avoid the battle? Are you so afraid of this opponent called Jiang Wang? Do you have so little confidence in me? Originally, as a perfected cultivator of Mount Yujing, he admired Lin Zhengren's performance in the battle against Jiang Liming. Now, he felt disgusted, as if he had swallowed a fly. In the face of Yu Qian's praise, Jiang Wang bowed calmly and said, "Thank you, perfected cultivator, for the announcement." With that, he stood still and did not speak. He held his sword and stood alone on the platform. His calm and confident attitude, as if he could face any situation at any time, showed everyone what a real Tianjiao was. On the other side of the platform, Jiang Limeng, who had dragged her body and insisted on watching the battle, gritted her teeth. She felt a great sense of humiliation. I actually lost to this kind of person. Today, she was here to observe Lin Zhengren and find out the reason for her defeat. Bravely facing defeat was the mentality of a strong person. But with Lin Zhengren's pretentious abandonment of the battle, her mentality completely collapsed. Others may not know, but how could she, who had personally experienced it, not know Lin Zhengren's ability to control those ghosts? If there really was a problem of easy backlash, how could she, Jiang Limeng, lose so badly, no matter how careless she was? This Lin Zhengren, facing the first vassal state, Tianjiao, used all his tricks and was unyielding. Although she lost, she had to admit that this person could be considered someone. Now, facing the second vassal state, Tianjiao, he did not even dare to go on stage and would rather hurt himself to avoid the battle. If you don't dare to go on stage, you should have just admitted defeat and let me go. Even if I die, I want to die on stage. Such a cowardly action can be spat on and disdained, but she lost to this kind of person. Then what was she, Jiang Limeng, considered? This was the greatest shame of her life. It seemed that Du Ruhui left with Lin Zhengren without much disturbance. But the shock caused by the battle was far from over. Even the number one beauty of the Great Chu could not help but look at Jiang Wang a few more times. What was this person relying on? How strong was he? One had to know that even if it was Dou Zhao, who had the 7 fighting styles, or Yung Gunzuan, who had the 5 prefectures' glory, who had stunned the world with 1 slash, none of his opponents had admitted defeat before the battle. Could it be that this Jiang Wang, at the inner palace level, had a stronger ruling power than the previous 2? Huang Shelley, who was already standing on stage A, was looking around complacently. "It's time for me to show my face. Look at me, Yilon, the great beauty, Yung Gunzuan, take a good look at me." But looking to the left, Yung Gunzuan was staring at Jiang Wang. Looking to the right, Yilon was also staring at Jiang Wang. Preposterous! Huang Shelley flew into a rage and fiercely glared at Jiang Wang. Although Jiang Wang did not know what was going on with this Tianjiao, his heart trembled. This woman's murderous aura was so strong. She did not pay attention to her opponent, but instead released her murderous aura towards him on another stage. Although Liao's Yalu might not be a match for her, why was she so arrogant? Did she want to fight everyone and meet in the finals? Was she challenging him to a battle? Thinking of this, Jiang Wang returned a look of affirmation and even nodded. I, Jiang Qingyang, have nothing to be afraid of. See you in the finals. Huang Shelley, who received this look, almost lifted his feet and went to stage G. Facing my soul interrogation, not only did this brat not reflect, he even dared to show off in front of me. He even nodded and showed off. He looked so ordinary, but he was so confident. At least she remembered that this was the main competition of the Yellow River Gathering. The list of opponents had already been decided, and she could not break the rules. Just wait and see. She clenched her teeth and fiercely glared back at Yalu. Yalu's lungs were about to explode. The people of Jing were too much of a bully. First, they looked around and pretended that I did not exist, and now they are threatening me face to face. I dare to come to the Yellow River Gathering. Do you think I'm afraid of you? He fiercely glared back. Not to mention how Yalu was unafraid of death. The other Tianjiao on the 8 stages were all fully prepared for the battle. On stage G, the Tianjiao Jiang Wang of Qi, who forced his opponent to give up with a smile, suddenly became the most idle person. He was calm. He looked left and right, then stared at Deng Qi and Yin Wenhua on stage G. He was ready to watch the battle. The reason why he chose to watch this battle was that he was very curious about Deng Qi from the Mu Kingdom. Secondly, he was also very interested in Yin Wenhua's 24 solar term sword. Below the stage, Chao Jie was still a little worried that Jiang Wang would not be able to achieve his goal and would feel indignant. However, this problem did not exist for Jiang Wang at all. He was surprised that Lin Zhengren suddenly suffered a blood ghost backlash. He had already prepared 2 plans to try to kill him on stage. He did not expect that he would not go on stage at all. However, other than being surprised, he did not feel indignant. Instead, he felt a little amused. He felt that he had made a mountain out of a molehill by treating this seriously. Was this person worthy of her? He had originally attached great importance to Lin Zhengren as an opponent. In order to completely eliminate him, he had not hesitated to ask Chao Jie to change the duel list. He had wanted to try to kill Lin Zhengren under the nose of perfected cultivator Yuhua. However, when Lin Zhengren had fainted and injured himself, he had stood alone on the martial arts stage. He had asked himself, why did I come to the Riverview platform? To kill Lin Zhengren? To humiliate Zhuang Jun and Zhuang Chen? That was not the case. I came here to fight for the #1 position in the world. Lin Zhengren did not even have the right to stand on this path to becoming the #1 position in the world, because he had already laid down on the ground. In this kind of Tianjiao, where the whole world was watching, he did not even have the courage to make a move. He did not even dare to test the waters. Could such a person, no matter how shrewd he was, really be considered a match? The path to the Tao was long and difficult. One could not always be prepared before embarking on the path. Without courage, how could one advance? Today, Jiang Wang stepped on this bright path and advanced toward the #1 position in the world. Whether the result was good or bad, whether he succeeded or not, he had already reached a higher position. As for Lin Zhengren, he would forever be left on the side of the road. He would never stop and wait. If he ever saw him again, he would just kill him. Chapter 1148. Deng Qi, why do you suddenly have this name? Helian Yunyan asked. Because there's a person with the surname Deng who will always be my hero's banner. Helian Yunyan sat closer to him. Her pale blue eyes were filled with love. Is this hero's banner still flying? Yes, I'm just saying it casually. The Yellow River meeting, a new name, a new atmosphere. The love in the grassland girls' eyes instantly turned into worship. Just saying it casually, and it has such a story and such a nice name. You're really talented. Zhao Ruqing was speechless. For some reason, Zhao Ruqing suddenly thought of this conversation as he stood on the training platform. He didn't intend to miss anyone, so he cut off this thought. At this moment, he looked at his opponent and calmed down. Deng Yu was already dead. This kind of death might be at the physical level or the spiritual level. But no matter what, the thoughts and emotions that belonged to Deng Yu must have died. He understood this very well, because a living Deng Yu would never allow himself to be used against him. The information on the notes sent by the Great Qin's warden was not reliable. Deng Yu was the person he understood the most, trusted the most, and the last person he could rely on in this world. Therefore, he knew that even the Great Qin's warden could not stop Deng Yu from dying. No matter how much life force was left on that finger, or what undetectable tricks it had done, there was only a trap waiting in what country. There was no Deng Yu. He repeated these words many times in his heart. He was not naive, but when it came to Deng Yu, he could not control his pitiful hope. But he knew that Deng Yu was already dead. This was an outcome. The outcome meant that it could not be changed. He was a smart person, and he always knew that he could not change the outcome. This was the case in the past, in the present, and in the future. Therefore, he had been running away, and he had given up according to the circumstances. But the disaster in Maplewood City made him decide that before the outcome that could not be changed appeared, he would at least do something to protect the person in front of him. He would only do this small effort and not involve anything else. And the gift from the Great Qin's warden. He could no longer remain silent. He started to want to return the kindness. Throughout the world, there were only 4 or 5 clans that could resist the Qin dynasty. The one closest to him was Mugwa. The closest opportunity was at the Riverview platform. That was why he stepped forward. Fighting for the reputation of the Mu Nation at the Yellow River Conference was the fastest way for him to gain status in the Mu Nation. The more dazzling one's performance was, the more powerful the protection and support one would receive. Yin Wenhua was not a random choice. Apart from the geniuses of the Overlord nations, Yin Wenhua was one of the most famous people and had a lot of weight. He was just about to borrow his name. Yu Qie's voice rang out. Everyone, this may very well be the most glorious moment of your lives. It was rare for him to say something like that, but it was obviously because of Lin Jingren's matter. Then he said, "Please shine." The clear light of Tianjiao on the separation platform disappeared. Rumble. Thunder rumbled. Listening carefully, it was not the sound of thunder, but the sound of a sword. Yin Wenhua pulled out his sword. What flowed was not sword light, but lightning. In an instant, thunder roamed the sky, and all living things sprouted, radiating vitality. When this sword came, the spring thunder moved, and the spring plowing began. It was the hibernation sword. Just the first sound of the sword was enough to make people feel the vitality of spring. Seeing this sword move forward and thunder roaming, it was like stepping on spring grass. It was an indescribable feeling. Jiang Wang could not help but laugh. When a good swordsman saw a good swordsmanship, it was inevitable that he would be excited. Although he was not a swordsman like Swordsman Ning, he was also extremely talented in swordsmanship. He loved swords as much as his life. Jishu had been hesitating about whether to watch Jiang Wang's battle or her senior brother Yin Wenhua's battle. There was nothing to hesitate about, but she had to struggle and hesitate. However, since Lin Jingren had given up, there was no need to struggle. Let's just watch. Let's see how Jiang Wang views the battle between Yin Wenhua and Deng Qi. She first noticed Jiang Wang's expression of admiration, and then she noticed Yin Wenhua's hibernation sword. She could not help but praise. Good taste. The 24 solar terms sword was written by her father. Even though Li Longchuan was very experienced, he could not help but feel a little surprised. The other party was fighting brilliantly. Why did she praise his taste? That's not right. Is there another meaning in this sentence? Was this what Uncle meant by profound words? Are the words of a Confucian scholar so mysterious? Su Xiangqian, who was very knowledgeable, looked at Jiang Wang enviously, and then looked at Zhao Wuyin encouragingly. Zhao Wuyin sighed silently. She never regretted the decision she made, and she could bear all the consequences of her own choices. However, this tall forehead always made her feel regretful. She always felt that this guy was not bad at all, but the next moment, she began to doubt her life. Sigh, let's watch the competition. On the field, thunder roared. Suddenly, a sword flashed past. The sword chi flew and exploded into trees of peach blossoms, which surrounded Deng Chi. Deng Chi, who was wearing a thick bronze mask, could not see his face at all. However, for some reason, just by standing there, he had an inexplicable feeling that the peach blossoms on the tree were born for him. It was a perfect match for him. Unfortunately, this peach tree was not a normal peach tree. The peach blossoms were sword flowers. It was beautiful, but it was full of danger. Deng Chi did not move, but he drew his sword. He did not have a sword in his hand. However, his left hand formed a sword shape, and the sword chi was violently shooting out. The sword chi was sharp, strong, and tangible. It was actually dark gold in color. Someone in the audience shouted, "Gung Jin, sword chi." Of course, this voice could not be transmitted into the third-class martial arts arena, and it was not enough to interfere with the battle on the stage. However, Jiang Wang could hear it clearly, and he could not help but pay more attention. Deng Chi's left hand held the Gung Jin sword chi, and his right hand formed a sword shape. Just like that, he pulled out a sword with his right hand, a long sword made of Gung Jin sword chi. After Deng Chi pulled out the sword, he only pulled it horizontally. TSS. TSS. The sharp sword chi cut through the air. The branches split, and the petals shattered. The sword had already cut through the peach trees and peach blossoms on the field. Yin Wenhua looked gentle and delicate, but when he moved, he was shocking. His sword was like thunder, and he was not a soft person. The long sword in his hand turned, and the falling peach blossoms on the ground were rolled up. Sweeping up the sword chi, he raised his sword again. Beautiful bird cries immediately sounded on the field, like heavenly music, intoxicating the listeners. The scattered sword chi gathered together, forming beautiful golden birds. These were songing birds. The cries rose and fell, playing a magnificent song together. The golden songing birds spread out in the sky, attacking Deng Chi from different angles. This move of the awakening hibernation was rather similar to the 8-note flame sparrow. However, Deng Chi, who was holding the Gung Jin sword, only slashed horizontally. His sword slashed halfway and suddenly scattered. It exploded into thousands of dark gold Gung Jin sword chi, strands and wisps, whistling through the air. Every strand of sword chi was the sword that slashed horizontally. The golden birds of sword chi had their necks cut off in an instant, and they fell like rain. Deng Chi clenched his hand, and the Gung Jin sword formed in his hand again. He finally moved forward. Yin Wenhua's sword move changed again. The long sword in his hand pointed, and the last change of shocking hibernation was made. There were 3 marquises in shocking hibernation. The first marquis, Tao Shihua, the second marquis, Cang Gungming, and the third marquis, the eagle turned into a dove. The first marquis was broken, the second marquis died, and now the third marquis was reborn. I also recommend my newly published novel, Journey to the West. It's for sale. It's a work that I personally like very much. Pushing across 100,000 miles, burning from the beginning to the end. Readers who have the habit of reading printed books must not miss it. Chapter 1149. The canon said, "The eagle of one mountain turned into a dove, forgetting to cry out, and the birds chased it away." It meant that an eagle had turned into a dove, but it had forgotten its identity and still cried out. As a result, it was chased away by the birds. It had lost the support of the eagle, but it still cried out. This was an unwise move. As the third stage of the shocking hibernation sword, this move had the meaning of spring decline, turning an eagle into a dove, making it unable to cry out. When this move landed from afar, the metal sword in Deng Chi's hand actually started to become unstable. Its bones started to collapse, and the sword energy dissipated. However, Deng Chi simply took the opportunity to stab forward, and the entire heptagold sword simply scattered into thousands of streaks. Countless metal sword energy swarmed toward Yin Wenhua, like a swarm of bees. Although the eagle had turned into a dove, how could a dove not kill people? If he didn't kill the eagle, he would kill the dove. The densely packed gung metal sword chi flew through the air like golden needles, piercing alls and a rain of arrows. It covered one's field of vision, and killing intent filled the sky. In Wenhua held the sword in front of him. He pressed his left hand against the sword and wiped it from bottom to top. A tongue tree stood tall in front of him, and white tongue flowers bloomed in the sky. They fell into a rain of flowers, drifting down. The white tongue flowers formed by the sword energy collided with the black gold line. In Wenhua's sword was called Clear Light. It was the fifth sword of spring in the 24 solar terms sword classic. The first stage of Clear Light was called Tongue Shirhua. The white tongue flowers in the sky were using clear light sword energy to fight against the metal sword energy. The sword energy fought, and the threads grinded. The sharp sound of sword energy whistling rose and fell. In Wenhua stepped forward. Behind the white tongue flowers, he faced the black gold sword energy rain. He shook the long sword in his hand and used the second stage of Clear Light. Second stage, the field mouse turned into a dove. Are you? Looking at him, striding over, his long sleeves fluttered. The ancient candlelight that had been passed down in the Longman Academy for a long time was like a brush, describing the flourishing of spring in his hand. The wind elemental energy turned into charmingly naive light green field mice that scurried around. They suddenly buried their heads and burrowed into the ground. On the other hand, the candlelight sword shone with sword radiance as it flew out of the sword and transformed into numerous graceful birds that glided and flew around on their own. This scene was as beautiful as a painting. Su Xiangqian, who was on the spectator stand, could not help but praise. At his age, he can actually use hibernation, awakening, and clarity to such an extent. What amazing talent in swordsmanship. More than that, Ji Shu said casually, among the younger generation of the Dragon Gate Academy, only 3 people have mastered the sword mantra of the 24 solar terms. Senior brother Yin Wenhua is one of them. Su Xiangqian frowned. You mean to say that I can learn the sword canon of the 24 solar terms? Li Longchuan was very clear. Although Su Gao was not serious, he had good foresight. Since he expressed his doubts, it meant that it was very difficult to cultivate the sword canon of the 24 solar terms at such a young age. In fact, it wasn't just difficult. The sword canon of the 24 solar terms was all-encompassing and was known as the sword canon of the world. This meant that this sword could be called an eternal classic, and it was also a model that should be used as a reference by all swordsmen. It was the Dragon Gate Academy's signature sword manual. When people talked about it, they all said that the creator of this sword manual was Dragon Gate's mountain lord, Yao Fu. However, Yao Fu emphasized many times that this sword manual was not his work alone. He only said that it was the combined effort of the Dragon Gate Academy's powerhouses. Looking at the entire sword canon of the 24 solar terms, it was indeed not created by Yao Fu alone. However, it was also a peerless sword manual that this great scholar had compiled, combined, supplemented, and sublimated from the outstanding sword techniques of the Dragon Gate Academy. Nearly half of the sword techniques were summarized from the foundation of the predecessors. The other half, however, was truly his own creation. In the end, he was able to combine them into one to create the sword canon of the 24 solar terms. Who knew how much effort he had put in? It was impossible for anyone to do it. With this sword manual, Yao Fu's contribution to the Dragon Gate Academy was enough to squeeze into the top 5 of the Mountain Lords. From this, one could deduce the strength of this sword manual without needing to be described. Every sword technique of the sword canon of the 24 solar terms was an exciting sword technique. Most of the core disciples of the Dragon Gate Academy specialized in a few of the sword techniques and studied them for their entire lives. It was not that the more they cultivated, the better it was. Even transcendent cultivators only had 24 hours a day. They had to choose what to do and what not to do. There was no shortcut in the cultivation of sword techniques. Every sword technique, from mastery to application, required a lot of hard work. It had to be painstakingly polished. If one wanted to be proficient in all techniques, the result would often be that none of them were proficient. It was not impossible for those old pedants who were stuck in their cultivation realms to cultivate the sword canon of the 24 solar terms. For a prodigy like Yin Wenhua to spend all his time on a killing technique like the sword canon of the 24 solar terms was like putting the cart before the horse and delaying his cultivation. It was hard to understand. Jishu looked at the battle on the stage and only smiled. It's not that difficult. Sister Zhao, you've also cultivated it. Haha. Su Xiangqian laughed dryly. Green Cliff Academy and Dragon Gate Academy were both among the 4 great academies in the world. He understood the difficulty of cultivating the sword canon of the 24 solar terms very well. He really did not know how to respond to Jishu's words. At this moment, Zhao Wuyin said, Junior brother Yin obtained the clear sword heart in the second inner mansion. This divine ability is called Clear Mind, able to see the master of all swords. Therefore, his sword cultivation speed is much faster than ordinary geniuses. Her voice was soothing, like the floating clouds. It was also peaceful, like the bright moon. Su Xiangqian muttered, I see. It was rare that he did not go along with the flow. In fact, he was already excited. This was the feeling. She could always soothe his heart easily. When interacting with her, he could obtain peace of mind that he could not obtain from others. In terms of appearance, she might not be considered a peerless beauty. She was far from being comparable to a beauty like Yilan. However, she could move Su Xiangqian's heart more than any other beauty. It was because of this aura. In Dragon Gate Academy, she was extremely loved and respected. She was an inviolable existence in the hearts of many young disciples. Outside Dragon Gate Academy, her admirers were as numerous as a river. For example, young talents like Green Cliff Academy's Su Xiangqian and Ocean Fishing Tower's Yang Lu were not rare. She had her unique beauty. It was a charm that was even more charming than her exquisite facial features. Su Xiangqian spent a lot of effort to make himself continue to look at the martial arts stage. And on the stage, facing Yin Wenhua's Qing Ming's second style, Deng Qi's choice was to go forward. The thick bronze mask prevented people from seeing his face. However, he had wide shoulders and a narrow waist. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and his figure was already very perfect. The 5 fingers of the hand holding the sword were slender and powerful. It had both strength and beauty. At this moment, he had used up all his sword chi. There was no sword in his hand, but he still maintained his posture. As he walked forward, his steps were casual and casual. The hand holding the sword first flicked his index finger. A dark gold sword chi directly fell to the ground. It covered the ground of the martial arts stage with a dark gold light. The sword chi that Yin Wenhua hid underground was thus blocked. Then it was the middle finger. The dark gold sword chi turned into a sharp cone and moved forward in a spiral shape. It seemed to drill through the air and the distance between him and Yin Wenhua. Then it was the ring finger, thumb, and pinky finger. The 5 fingers flicked open one after another, like flowers blooming. Deng Qi seemed to be walking among the flowers, picking flowers when he was free. That posture was extremely confident and beautiful. It made people want to take a look at his true appearance under the bronze mask. The white-tongued sword flowers that filled the sky and the chirping Qingming sword chi birds were all swept away. It was clear and bright. It was Xiao Wu Hua pinching sword finger. P.S. Rue little bird, those who are interested can read the story of the eagle turning into a dove. The original text has a long paragraph, but I have simplified it into one sentence. Chapter 1150. Helian Yunyun sat gracefully on the spectator stand. She looked rather noble and dignified as she watched the battle on the stage without saying a word. In fact, she was pinching herself with her nails to prevent herself from jumping up and cheering. After all, her mother, the great empress of the Mu Kingdom, had descended here. It was her own business to chase after Zhao Ruqing in private. If she was shameless in front of everyone, the pearl in her palm might become a mud ball under her feet. Therefore, she sat gracefully and steadily, not moving at all. Sitting beside her was a nun wearing a bamboo hat and a black veil. Her black robe was very loose, making it difficult to see her figure. Yesterday, Helian Yunyan was still sitting alone in a dignified manner, so this tightly covered black-clothed nun only came today. She had not spoken since the start of the battle. Only when she saw Deng Qi's sword finger did she ask in surprise, "Your Mu kingdom has such a killing technique with such a deep Buddhist charm?" It was inevitable that she would be surprised. A godly nation like the Mu kingdom had a strong rejection of foreign extraordinary power. Even the Confucian school could not open an academy in the Mu kingdom, let alone the school of Buddhism, which also had a strong religious significance. The Mu kingdom has vast territory and abundant resources. Tianjiao is like the rain. What killing techniques do we not have? Helian Yunyan waved her hand indifferently. It's not surprising. On the opposite side of the spectator stand, Chun Suwu of the Song Kingdom also frowned. Tianjiao, who could represent the Mu kingdom in the Battle of the Yellow River, was definitely not ordinary. No matter how strong they were, it was acceptable. Jin Gu, who came from the famous Jin family, was famous for his violent killing power. Deng Qi could replace Jin Gu before the start of the battle, so he was definitely not weak. He would not underestimate him. The Song Kingdom also did not have the right to underestimate the Mu Kingdom. What made him frown was that Deng Qi had learned a lot of things. Up until now, he had not shown the power of the divine sect, nor had he shown the ultimate techniques of any of the Mu Kingdom's true blood families. Even the famous secret techniques of the Mu Kingdom's imperial court were nowhere to be seen. What he used were obscure and unpopular secret techniques that had never been heard of before. For example, many people knew about the Gung metal sword aura. There were also quite a few killing techniques that used the Gung metal sword Qi as the foundation. However, for it to be so pure and sharp, and to be able to use it to such an extent where it could gather and disperse at will. The killing technique that Deng Qi had used was truly terrifying. It was just that no one knew what its name was and who it was inherited from. The small, formless flower-pinching sword finger that he was using now was a combination of Buddhism and Taoism. It was created by an expert who entered Taoism through Buddhism, but it was an inheritance from 1,000 years ago. Chen Siwu was only able to recognize it because he had read about it in an ancient book. How many trump cards like this did Deng Qi have? He himself was proficient in the 6 arts, using the 5 archery rites, White Arrow, Qin Lian, Shan Zhu, Xiang Qi, and Jing Yi to achieve Dao. Yin, he could be considered to have read a lot of books, and his cultivation was very diverse. However, he couldn't see through Deng Qi at all. He couldn't see through his master's lineage, and he couldn't see through his background. It was as if everything about this person was hidden under that strange bronze mask, and there were endless possibilities. He shook his head. Facing such a Tianjiao, Yin Wenhua had no chance. Song Country didn't enter the top 8 in the arena, and now the Intermansion Arena would also be eliminated in the first round of the competition. Suddenly, the pressure on his body became even greater. Song Country's strongest Tianjiao had already made a judgment outside the arena. However, Yin Wenhua himself naturally disagreed. In other words, no matter who denied him, he would only seek an answer from his Zhuming sword. Deng Qi used the small, formless flower-pinching sword finger and instantly cleared the arena. Yin Wenhua didn't have time to continue the second transformation of the Qingming sword. He directly held the Zhuming sword in reverse. As the saying goes, a candle in a dark room is bright. This sword was a sword that was buried in ancient books and seeking knowledge. Of course, it was also determined to forge ahead. It was in the list of famous weapons in Song Country. He had used this sword to defend himself since he was young. Their minds were already connected. When he held the sword in reverse, a blazing light suddenly soared into the sky and went straight to Deng Qi. The sword aura was like a rainbow There were 3 stages in the Qingming sword. The first stage was Tong Shihua. The second stage was the transformation of a field mouse into a mouse. The third stage was the beginning of a rainbow. Now it was the third stage. The light covered the sun, and the rainbow pierced through the sky. The sky was opened. Distance did not exist. The air was connected. This sword was like a divine light descending from the sky. In the eyes of the spectators, they could only see a brilliant rainbow. It was dazzling and eye-catching. But Deng Qi's 5 fingers were like a blooming flower. It was like playing the zither on a summer night, like the drums in autumn, like picking flowers in spring. It was extremely beautiful. It was full of leisure. Who knows how, but with a twist, he grabbed the rainbow in his hand. The 5 fingers holding the rainbow. This scene was too beautiful. It was like a poem. It was intoxicating and amazing. The flowers bloomed and withered, the birth and death of fate. The small, formless flower pinching sword finger crushed the rainbow of sword aura. At this moment, Deng Qi, who was strolling forward, and Yin Wenhua, who was striding forward, met in the middle of the arena. Since the start of the battle, they had already exchanged a few rounds. However, this was the first time they were so close to each other. This distance was very subtle. The Zhuming sword was 3.5 feet long. This was a distance that could kill with one sword. Therefore, when the rainbow of sword aura of the Qingming sword was shattered, Yin Wenhua's sword momentum changed again. He turned around and slashed with his sword. The sword rose like a swan goose and let out the cry of a mystic bird. The air howled and sword chi streaked. The cry of a swan goose, the cry of a mystic bird, and the cry of 100 birds. The divine power of the clear sword heart was not only extremely beneficial to the cultivation of sword techniques, its effects were also immediate in attacks. The moves were pure, and he could do as he pleased. The White Du sword also had 3 conditions. The first condition was the arrival of a swan goose. The second condition was the return of a mystic bird, and the third condition was a flock of birds. Yin Wenhua controlled the 3 conditions with a single sword and pushed the sword to its peak. Instantly, 100 birds chirped and flew around Deng Qi. They pecked and fell like rain. The entire arena was filled with the sword light of the Zhuming sword. The entire sky and ground were filled with the sword chi of the White Du sword. That sword destroyed one's vision and senses. One could only see the White Du and wait for the birds. The sword chi streaked across like 100 birds worshipping a phoenix. Those who were not phoenixes would definitely die. The terrifying sword intent, sword chi, and sword light had already enveloped Deng Qi completely. However, that was not the end. The true meaning of that sword was, the birds are storing food for the winter solstice. Therefore, the true killing move was actually the other sword move of the 24 solar term sword technique, winter solstice sword. Yin Wenhua used the White Du sword to create momentum and the winter solstice sword to win. It was in line with the principle of autumn and winter. It was also the Tao of nature's cycle. If one did not master the 24 solar terms sword classic thoroughly, they would definitely not be able to do that. When the White Du sword accumulated power to its peak, the power of the winter solstice sword would be terrifying. He would truly be able to cause the winter solstice to wither with a single sword strike. Back then, the Dragon Gate Mountain Master, Yao Fu, became famous because he changed the heavens and earth with a single sword strike. He caused midsummer to turn into winter and killed all his opponents. Of course, Yin Wenhua could not do that. However, it should not be a problem for him to kill all the snowflakes within 3 steps. That was a killing move. However, Deng Qi's casual footsteps suddenly turned. He walked very strangely. He clearly took a step to the right, but when his foot landed, he avoided the surging sword chi and sword light and stepped within 3 feet of Yin Wenhua. What kind of footwork was that? Just as this thought appeared in Yin Wenhua's mind, he suddenly saw the shadow of a great golden-winged roc pouncing toward him. This bird fed on dragons. Although it was not a phoenix, it was unharmed by the worship of hundreds of birds. Upon closer inspection, It was a holy and dazzling golden sword finger. It was fast, too fast. Just as his eyes caught sight of the finger, the sword finger had already touched his forehead. The White Dew Sword Classic was not over, and the Winter Solstice Sword Classic was not over yet. The timing of the finger was perfect. It interrupted the continuation of summer and winter and stopped the momentum of the killing move. Intense pain spread out in an instant. When Yin Wenhua felt the pain, a ball of clear light had already enveloped him. Yu Qian made his move. Yu Qian judged that he was in danger of dying. Yin Wenhua instantly lost all his strength. He could only watch as the two fingers, which looked like they were made of gold, were slowly pulled out of the wound between his eyebrows. How can I lose? He thought. I cultivate the 24 solar terms Sword Classic, and I am unparalleled among those in the same realm. Do Zhao can dominate the world with the 7 fighting styles, and the Mountain Master's 24 solar terms Sword Classic is also one of the best in the world. How can I? He fell in the first round of the official competition. He left home when he was young and abandoned his life of luxury to study at Longman Academy. He practiced martial arts in the morning and at night every day. He never dared to slack off. He went from a toddler to this day and became the pride of his family. He represented Song Kingdom and stepped onto the Riverview platform. Those cold nights when he practiced his sword, those mornings when he studied hard. Is this all I can do? I have only used 4 of the 24 solar terms Sword Classic. The Mountain Master always said that there was more Tianjiao than Tianjiao. Beyond the tall mountains, there were taller mountains. This is all I can do. Yin Wenhua had a very cool feeling. For some reason, the blood flowing from between his eyebrows. It was not warm. Perhaps it was because it was a pity. Chapter 11:51. The outcome of the battle on stage C had been decided. At the spectator stand, Yi Lingxiao couldn't help but exclaim, Garuda formation, breaking sword finger. His reason for being surprised was the same as Chun Siwu's. Deng Qi had too many tricks up his sleeve. The small formless flower-picking sword finger was a combination of Taoism and Buddhism. Now, the Garuda formation breaking sword finger was a combination of Buddhism and the military. Apart from that, there was also the killing technique that used the gung metal sword aura. However, the few steps he took during the battle were equally exquisite and peerless. Yi Lingxiao could only vaguely guess that it was the great 5 elements heaven mixing steps. This secret technique required one to gather the wind of the 5 elements as the foundation of cultivation. Just this step alone was enough to stop many people. The process of cultivation was too complicated. Even in the era when it was very famous, there were very few people who could cultivate it. They thought it was lost. Where did the Moon Nation find such a person? There was no doubt about the foundation of the Overlord Nation. No matter how many mysterious techniques they had, it was not surprising. However, there was a limit to one's strength. Blindly pursuing a wide range of combat techniques would inevitably lead to insufficient cultivation. The 24 solar terms Sword Classic was a complete set. They were all related and could be used together. The mysterious gung metal sword aura killing technique, the small formless flower picking sword finger, the Garuda formation breaking sword finger, the great 5 elements heaven mixing steps, and so on were all very powerful. However, they were somewhat unrelated and difficult to mix. When experts nurtured their juniors, they would help them plan out a system of killing techniques instead of letting them practice whatever they wanted. A powerful country like the Mu Nation would definitely not let Tianjiao make such a mistake, unless to the genius named Deng Qi, who was on the stage. Learning these killing techniques did not require him to expend too much energy. He could do it without affecting his cultivation progress. From this perspective, the Mu Nation's Deng Qi's abilities were probably far greater than this. Yi Lingxiao was suddenly very curious about how many more killing techniques this person could come up with in the next battle. At the same time, he glanced at Jiang Wang gloatingly. This kid is in danger. Deng Qi's performance in Tianjiao, Mu country, shocked everyone. If this person had displayed some kind of powerful abhijna, even if it was heaven's sanctum, Jungenzuin wouldn't have been so shocking. He was the only one who kept on changing his terrifying killing techniques, using his sword fingers to break through Yin Wenhua's 24 solar term swords. As the most precious secret treasure of a cultivator, the Ubijna indeed had unlimited potential. More often than not, once a divine ability seed was plucked, it would possess extraordinary power. No matter how one looked at it, Abhijna had unparalleled value. Because of this, many people viewed divine ability as their foundation, believing that divine ability represented everything. If the Abhijna was strong, the Shioja would be strong. However, this wasn't entirely true. The same divine ability would have different effects in different people's hands. Sometimes, it could even be said that they were worlds apart. In addition, the ability itself depended on talent. Sometimes, fate, luck, and experience were all indispensable. Apart from treasures like the divine ability fruit, it was almost impossible to obtain a divine ability. For example, Chi's Heaven's sanctimistic realm only gave cultivators the possibility of divine ability, turning possibility into certainty. If it was impossible, then there was no certainty. And those who lacked talent would almost never be able to leave the Heaven's sanctimistic realm alive, since divine ability depended on talent, were those who lacked fate, luck, and were born without divine ability destined to be weak. Countless strong cultivators in history had said no to this. For example, some people were born with Tao meridians and were on the path of transcendence. Were they destined to be high and mighty? However, there was the path of blood and Qi meridians, and countless Shioja risked their lives to become transcendents. Later, the meridian unlocking pill prospered the human race. The potential of the heaven primordial pill to open meridians was not inferior to those born with Tao meridians. Even when it came to opening meridians, cultivators who used the most ordinary meridian unlocking pill were stronger than those born with Tao meridians. The cry when the meridian unlocking pill was created, humans don't decide their lives based on talent. In the long history of the human race, this had always been the case. Therefore, there was a saying, man can conquer nature. Those endless secret techniques, Tao techniques, and killing techniques were the supplement, catch up, and even surpass of divine ability by the human race. There were Lang Tu's obliterating divine ability characteristics and divine ability attainments. There were also killing techniques like divinity obliteration, which required the obliteration of divine ability seeds to be cultivated. Of course, it was undeniable that divine abilities were powerful. However, Do Zhao's battle golden body did not lose to Yung Gunzuan, who had 5 residences and 5 divine abilities. True strong cultivators needed to know that divine ability was not the only thing. They needed to use divine ability, not be used by divine ability. The spectators on the spectator stand all had their own thoughts. Only Jiang Wang, who was standing on stage G, had a different feeling. Seeing that the battle had ended and Yu Xie had already announced the result, Yin Wenhua was also carried down stage C. Jiang Wang looked at Deng Qi, who was about to walk down the stage, and couldn't help but ask, "Do we know each other?" Deng Qi turned his head so that he could clearly see the deep engravings on the bronze mask. In a slightly strange voice, he said, "The second round of the main competition is about to begin. Isn't it a little too late to be friendly now?" Jiang Wang smiled. "Sorry to disturb you." Then he walked down the stage. It was just as Deng Qi had said. The list of the top 8 was about to be decided. It was possible for anyone to meet anyone. It had seemed like he was trying to be friendly. But he had just watched the battle in Tianjiao, the Moon Nation, and the more he watched, the more familiar he felt. Even though he had never seen or heard of the various killing techniques that this person had used, he had never seen or heard of them before. But when he looked at this person, he felt really close. Wearing a thick bronze mask and bearing the background of a powerful country like the Moon Nation, he slowly overlapped with the figure in his memory. Every move, even the way he walked, there was a faint shadow. Even though his rationality told him that it was impossible, he couldn't help but think, could it be? how he hoped that a miracle would happen. When he walked down the stage, two loud sounds were heard almost at the same time. Jiang Wang turned his head abruptly and looked to the left first. What spread out in front of his eyes was a wanton painting. Huang Shelley, who was actually very good-looking, was holding a demon-subduing pestle with one hand and maintaining the posture of swinging it. He was in mid-air, his yellow robe fluttering, and his aura was wild and arrogant. And in front of the golden demon-subduing pestle, half of Yeluji's face was caved in. A clear light blocked the demon-subduing pestle. Obviously, Yu Qian had made a move. Jiang Wang looked to the right and only saw Donghua Bao's fallen figure among the fragments of the mechanism on the ground. He fell to the ground and exploded like a blood bag. Blood flowed everywhere, leaving only a shriveled skin. He was completely dead. This was the first Tianjiao to die in the main competition of the Yellow River meet this year. Not far from this shriveled skin, Tinta held her knees with both hands and panted heavily. Top 8. Sizzle, Donghua Bao's skin also melted in the blood. After writing the update yesterday, I used an hour to edit the first chapter of this book. The main problem was to solve the problem of the opening chapter not being very immersive and some readers not being able to read the story. I simplified Zhua Guanglia's battle and enhanced the visuals. Of course, the clues and settings were not changed and did not affect the rest of the story. I'm just informing everyone. This edit caused many chapters to be shifted, and more than 300 chapters were lost. It's a pity. I like some of the chapters. Chapter 1152. Xia and Wei were both in the southern region. They were geographically close and had a certain level of national strength. Conflicts were inevitable. After Xia lost the Battle of Qi in Xia, it was attacked from all sides overnight. Rebellion of rebellion, independence of independence, invasion of aggression. The country almost collapsed, and the country was wiped out. As the saying went, everyone kicks a man when he is down. Wei was one of those countries that took advantage of the situation. Of course, there was nothing to blame them for. When Xia was at its peak, it had also suppressed Wei. In recent years, both sides have been actively mending their relationship, opening up trade routes, exchanging Dao techniques to deal with the increasing pressure from the overlord countries. However, no one would be soft-hearted when they met on the Yellow River Gathering's martial arts arena. However, what was going on? What happened? Was Tao Yi hiding his strength? He could actually kill his opponent under the watch of perfected cultivator Yu Qian? Jiang Wang looked at Chao Jia questioningly. Chao Jia sent a voice transmission back. Donghua Bao died because of his life-burning technique. He's in this state now because he was poisoned. That was understandable. Donghua Bao had burned his life to win. Yu Qian could not protect him. That was equivalent to forcefully influencing the other party's choice. It was not in line with the Yellow River Gathering's principle of fairness. However, he could not win even after burning his life. This meant that Tao Yi was quite capable. Moreover, this kind of poison that could corrode a person into a pool of blood was indeed terrifying. Jiang Wang was silent for a moment. He did not have a deep impression of Donghua Bao. In the Intermansion selection competition, the most eye-catching people were Yin Wenhua, Xia Ai, and the like. He only had an initial impression of Donghua Bao as brave and straightforward. During the competition for the 3 spots in the losers competition, he had risked his life to win the qualification for the main competition. In the main competition, he still risked his life and lost his life in the first round. Everyone could say beautiful words. There were people everywhere who would say, "Who cares about life and death for the country?" However, there were not many people who could really do it. From Yin Xiaofei to Donghua Bao, Wei was a country that could not be underestimated. Yu Qian announced the outcome of the 2 martial arts arenas almost at the same time. At this moment, the great general of Wei Nation, Wu Sun, stepped onto the arena. He did not see it as a pity for the victor. Victory, defeat, life, and death were all matters of the battlefield. This was the Battle of the Yellow River. He only half-knelt on the ground with the dignity of a grand general. He stretched out his hands and cupped the blood on the ground into a ball. You are a warrior of the Wei Kingdom. I, Wu Sun, am proud of you. He held the blood in his hands and stood up. Now, I'll take you home. He walked down the stage and walked out. Among the Wei nation's spectators, the Wei people said in unison, "Return and come." One by one, the Wei people left their seats and followed behind Wu Sun. The back view of this world-famous general was indescribably heavy. He was really going home. The Wei nation had never obtained an unrestricted spot for those under the age of 30. By now, the outer pavilion and the inner pavilion were both finished. The Tianjiao gathering this time was already over for the Wei nation. It couldn't be said that the results weren't good. After all, there was the third in the world in the outer arena. The harvest was not bad, but Dong Bao was gone. This Tianjiao, who had been honed in the military, was cut off at the river viewing platform for the glory of the Wei nation. These were the soldiers under his command, his fellow soldiers. Wu Sun could not help but feel heavy. But this was how the Tianjiao of the various countries fought. After the endless glory, there was more cruelty and pain. For every Tianjiao that walked forward, there were many who fell behind them. The beginning of a story was the end of many stories. Life and death were the same. The first round of the inner pavilion of the Yellow River Gathering was Jiang Wang of Qi against Lin Zhengren of Zhuang, Deng Qi of Mu against Yin Wenhua of Song, Huang Shelley of Jing against Yelu Ji of Liao, Qin Zizhen of Qin against Xiao Shu of Pil Nation, Xiang Bei of Chu against Bai Yu Xia of Yu, Dong Bao of Wei against Tan Pian of Xia, Xia of Shui against Huang Su of Liang, Bei Gongku of Yong, Jiang Xiaohua of Shun. After the first round of battles, the top 8 were decided. The victors were Jiang Wang, Deng Qi, Huang Shelley, Qin Zizhen, Bei Xiang, Tan Pian, Xia Ai, and Bei Gongku. It was expected that the overlord Tianjiao would win first place. Xiao Shu of Pil Nation, Yelu Ji of Liao, and Yin Wenhua Song were all beaten up badly. Bai Yu Xia of the Yu State, in particular, was punched through by North Xiang. He was saved by Yu Qian's timely rescue. From this point of view, Lin Zhengren of Zhuang only lost a blood ghost, which seemed to be the best result, of course. The actual loss could not be calculated like this. However, Tan Pian, who was looked down upon because he did not care about his reputation, was able to win against Tianjiao of Wei. This surprised many people. Of course, this was also a kind of luck. Qi of Tianjiao, who should have defeated him in the first round, chose Tianjiao of Zhuang as his opponent instead. In comparison, Zhuang, who had been in the limelight because of Lin Zhengren, was now disgraced because of Lin Zhengren. On the other hand, Bei Gongku of Yong successfully made it into the top 8. This kind of comparison between old rivals was thought-provoking. When Yong was at its peak, it was able to fight evenly with Jing and did not lose to the current 5 Northwest Kingdom alliance. However, after Han Yin seized the throne, he did not improve. After a few hundred years of decline, he actually lost the war against Zhuang. As the grandson of Bei Gongyu of Yong and the number 1 Tianjiao of Yong's younger generation, Bei Gongku shouldered a huge responsibility. It was obvious that he had shouldered this responsibility. Yong had not seen a spot in the top 8 of the Yellow River Conclave in a few hundred years. The resources that this spot represented were very important to Yong, which was currently under Han Su's rule. Han Su personally initiated a revolution to completely reform Yong and restore or even surpass the glory of Emperor Yongming. This required hard work from all sides. Just the support of the Mahis sect was not enough. The strength of a country was not as simple as the accumulation of experts and resources. The first thing was to rebuild the confidence of the people of Yong. The entire country had to believe that a brand new Yong had arrived. From this perspective, Bei Gongku's achievements at the Yellow River Conclave were significant. Of course, after reaching the top 8, even a hegemon could not decide their opponent. Whoever he wanted to teach a lesson to, suppress, or avoid, it all depended on luck. The 8 martial arts arenas had been combined into 4. Yu Qian opened the screen again. The names of the top 8 of the inner palace shone like stars. Jiang Wang stared intently at the screen. He was not nervous, only expectant. He was looking forward to fighting Deng Qi of Mu. He was looking forward to tearing off that person's mask and verifying his wild hope. He was looking forward to fighting Qin Jijin and asking him for an answer about advancing. He was looking forward to fighting North Xiang and helping Zhuo Guangshu vent his anger. He was looking forward to the killing power of the Yellow Saraira and seeing what gave him the right to be arrogant. If he could meet Tan Pian, he also wanted to bear the responsibility of Qi's Tianjiao, suppress Xia, and try to erase Xia's Tianjiao. Even if all of this was not mentioned, he and his sword also yearned for a strong opponent. Anyone who could reach the top 8 of the Yellow River Conclave was worthy of him drawing his sword. Now his sword was in his hand. His people were below the stage. He was waiting for an opponent, no matter who that opponent was. The list of opponents on the screen was finally fixed. Jiang Wang of Qi's Tianjiao versus North Xiang of Chu's Tianjiao. Chapter 11:53. Interesting. North Xiang was a tall and sturdy young man. He wore a gorgeous black and gold martial suit, which was extremely tight with his muscles. He always held his head high, and his double pupils were overflowing with pride. Among the top 8, there were 5 hegemonic states, Tianjiao. Therefore, in the top 8, at least 2 hegemonic states, Tianjiao, would clash in advance. Qi and Chu just so happened to occupy this unlucky spot. The remaining 3 hegemonic states, Tianjiao, were all against opponents outside of the hegemonic states. Deng Qi of Mu was up against Xie Xie of Shui. Huang Serura of Jing was up against Tan of Xia. Qin Jijin was up against Bei Gongku of Yong. North Xiang had undoubtedly drawn a bad lot, but he only felt that it was interesting. The so-called the strong have strong luck, in fact, was a true strong enough to resist any risk. Even in bad luck, they could rely on their strength to win a good result. Then bad luck naturally wouldn't become bad luck. North Xiang was undoubtedly a very confident person. After seeing the list of opponents, he stepped onto the martial arts stage. He stood with drooping eyes, expressionless. From beginning to end, he didn't look at Jiang Wang. It could be said that he was arrogant. He wasn't targeting Jiang Wang. He had always been like this. He didn't care about the selection of the inner court of the Yellow River Assembly. In Chu, he was also known for his arrogance. He had personally defeated Zhuo Guangshu during the internal selection of the Chu country, and had even said these words, "I have 3 great regrets. First, I regret not being born 900 years earlier and not being able to see Huang Weijin. Second, I regret the crushing defeat in the valley and the mourning of Chu's 10,000 households. Third, I regret Zhuo Guanglie's early death. I regret the decline of the Zhuo family and the absence of fireworks in the human world. The courage of the world is in vain, but there are no heroes in sight." Huang Weijin was a sage of Chu, the creator of the developing law pavilion. It could also be said that this person opened the era of Chu's techniques and armors. Needless to say, the Battle of the Valley was a pain that Chu hadn't experienced in 100 years. North Xiang wasn't the only one who had great regrets, and his third great regret was that he only regarded Zhuo Guanglie as an opponent in the same realm. It was unknown whether or not he had changed his mind after the end of the battle for supremacy in the Outer Tower. Not to mention Yung Genzun, Do Zhao, who was also in Chu, shouldn't be enough for him to say that there were no heroes in the world. But it didn't matter whether he changed his mind or not. Jiang Wang only knew that this person's disdain for Zhuo Guangshu made the child unable to leave the great illusionary land for several days and nights. In the quarterfinals, Jiang Wang didn't think it was bad luck for him to run into North Xiang. It just so happened that he was very satisfied and felt that his wish had come true. It was different from North Xiang's. "I have no one in my eyes, and all the heroes in the world are nothing but weeds." Jiang Wang took a good look at his opponent, from his neck to his chest and abdomen. He looked at it very seriously. He had been watching from the moment he stepped onto the martial arts stage. He was still watching even after he stepped onto the martial arts stage. Seeing this, North Xiang finally couldn't lower his eyes. No matter who it was, it would be very difficult to maintain a state of indifference when someone was constantly staring at their vitals and sizing them up. He could only raise his eyes and look at Jiang Wang with his mysterious double pupils. Thanks to Jiang Wang's seriousness, it should be said that Tianjiao of Qi and Chu, who occupied the martial arts stage A, was the first group to enter the state of mind in the quarterfinals. If it weren't for Yu Qia's clear light, the battle would have probably already begun. Deng Qi glanced at Jiang Wang's back and also at North Xiang's neck. Then he slowly walked onto the martial arts stage to face his opponent this round, Xia from Shui country, who came from extremely cold place. Xia AI was very beautiful. How beautiful was she? Huang Shelley, who had already stood on the martial arts stage C and was facing Xia AI from a distance, kept looking at the martial arts stage D. That was the battlefield of Xia AI and Deng Qi. She had a cold and white complexion, thin eyebrows, and a thin face. There was no expression on her face, but she naturally made people feel sorry for her. She really had a very sad and cold face. She was just like her name, beautiful but sad. The reason why Huang Shelley didn't put all her energy on her face was that she still had to keep an eye on Jiang Wang occasionally. In short, she always kept an eye on him and didn't want him to steal the limelight. As for her opponent, could Xia AI, who had to work hard for the loser's match in the preliminaries, be considered an opponent? Of course, this was only Huang Shelley's opinion. She didn't like this kind of behavior, but it didn't stop Xia AI from going all the way to the quarterfinals. Xia AI was completely different from Yelu Ji's anger about being ignored. Xia AI was only happy, and it was even what she wanted, but she still pretended to be angry. At the same time, she couldn't help but pay attention to Jiang Wang. If Tianjiao of Qi could be eliminated by Tianjiao of Chu in this round, it would be the best result. At least in the intermansion arena, Xia's results wouldn't lose to Qi's. And if he could seize the opportunity when Huang Shelley was careless, this Yellow River gathering might be the beginning of the Xia kingdom overtaking the Qi kingdom. The Battle of Tianjiao of Hegemony was naturally the most anticipated battle. Xiang Bei, who was arrogant, also had the strength to match his arrogance. In the previous round of the quarterfinals, he easily crushed by Yu Xia of Tianjiao of Yu. He didn't even use the weapon that made him famous. He only used a pair of iron fists to beat Bai Yuxia to the brink of death with 3 punches. Bai Yuxia had fought hard all the way here. His strength was obvious, and he definitely wasn't weak. It could only be said that he was too fierce, and his foundation had been seen through long ago. In an event like the Yellow River meeting, he was destined not to go far. And Jiang Wang of Tianjiao of Qi scared his opponent so much that he fainted and left the arena with just a smile. He created the record of the fastest victory in the history of the Yellow River meeting. People couldn't help but wonder how terrifying this person was to be able to scare his opponent like that. No matter how you looked at it, this battle was very exciting, and people were looking forward to it. All of this attention, Jiang Wang, who was standing on the arena, had completely abandoned it. Now is the time to fight. He only stared at his opponent. He only thought about how to win. He and his Sauvignon Blanc had made all the preparations. He didn't stare at Xiang Bei's eyes. Instead, he stared at his opponent's shoulder. Since he was born with polychoria, it was impossible for him not to cultivate eye techniques. Although he had learned the eye of Qianyang and the power of his soul was strong, he didn't intend to attack his opponent's strength. Speaking of which, because of Lin Jingren's withdrawal, this was the first time he felt Yu Qia's clear light up close. This light seemed to be faintly discernible and completely powerless. But there was a kind of determination that couldn't be crossed. It flowed there quietly. It was so thin that it seemed to be able to disperse with a breath. But he knew that he couldn't rush over, and neither could his opponent. When the start of the battle was announced, the clear light flowed away like water. Jiang Wang put his hand on the hilt of his sword. A black shadow had already appeared in front of his eyes. The black shadow spread out, and the surroundings were dark. There was no light in his eyes, and he could only see the long night. He had been hit by the eye technique. Xiang Bei's eye technique was too terrifying. Jiang Wang was already on full alert and didn't look at his eyes, but he was still hit by it. A warning came from the Tongtian Palace. that strong sense of danger and the discomfort transmitted by the Taoist meridian and true spirit. It meant that there was an invasion. He was still at the inner mansion level, but he could use soul attacks as a common method and even invade his opponent's Tongtian palace. This was not Jiang Wang's harassment tactic of hiding his soul and then retreating. Judging from the strength of the invasion, this was a real battle at the soul level. Xiang Bei's terror could be seen clearly with just one glance. But Jiang Wang closed his eyes. Very good. Welcome to visit. A contemporary perfected person died in my Tongtian palace. Chapter 1154. Although Xiang Bei was arrogant, he would not underestimate the Tianjiao of Qi. Tianjiao, who represented the overlord state, would not be weak. Therefore, although he had beaten Bai Yuxia to the brink of death with just 3 punches, he immediately used his trump card when facing the Tianjiao of Qi. He was born with polychoria, and his control of the power of the soul was far superior to ordinary people. Moreover, he had the inheritance of the famous Xiang clan of Great Chu. Although he was still in the inner mansion, he had already mastered many soul-killing techniques. He had never met a cultivator in the same realm who could fight with him in the soul level. He had once wanted to try Dou Zhao's decaying body and soul technique. However, when he had reached perfection, Dou Zhao, who was invincible in the inner mansion of Great Chu, had already stepped into the outer mansion. Therefore, he missed the opportunity. However, in Great Chu, whether it was Zhuo Guangxu of the Zhuo clan or Chu Yuji, who was born in the military, they were all defeated by him. Only Chu Shanhua of the Chu clan could cause some trouble, but it was only at the level of trouble and could not be considered a threat. Later, he also tried decaying body and soul technique in the hands of Dou Mian, who had also obtained the battle golden body and learned the 7 battle styles. Many people in Great Chu thought that he, who was the number 1 in the inner mansion of Great Chu, did not have the power to dominate the inner mansion like Dou Zhao, and he could not be compared to Zhuo Guanglia, who had won the Yellow River Assembly at the age of 15. However, in his opinion, it was only because the power of the soul level was not easy to be seen through. Often, one step was the difference between life and death. Of course, on the Riverview platform yesterday, Dou Zhao's decaying body and soul technique had broken Gan Chang and soul travel. It made him realize the power of this technique. Even Gan Chang and soul travel had shown the power of the soul that was superior to his. However, when he went to the outer mansion and set up the 4 Saints building, his soul power was also incomparable. Polychoria, a natural phenomenon, could be seen as an innate divine ability. It was connected to the first inner mansion from birth. As one's age and cultivation level increased, the divine ability seed would directly manifest in the first inner mansion. In other words, it was the manifestation of the divine ability seed. They were people with extraordinary talent who were born with divine abilities. For cultivators who possessed natural phenomenons, there was no barrier to pass from the soaring dragon to the inner palace. Before the great revolution in the path of cultivation, he was also an existence that was close to the divinity realm. He was a genius among geniuses. Since ancient times, there were 3 types of dichoria phenomena recorded in the history books. There were 2 suns in the sky. Sun, moon, sun, moon. The heavenly dog devours the sun. The external appearance was that the 2 round pupils were side by side. The 2 round and incomplete pupils were facing each other, and the big and small round pupils were embedded. Infinity Kel. Among the 3 dichoria phenomenons, the sky-traversing twin suns phenomenon had the most precise control over one's spiritual energy. Furthermore, one's spiritual energy was naturally several times stronger than that of an ordinary person. Norxian's polychoria happened to be the sky-crossing double suns. The longer he cultivated and the higher his realm, the greater the gap between his soul power and that of ordinary cultivators. Beixiang naturally had absolute confidence in his own soul power. The fact that he had given up on probing the outside world and invaded the Tongtian palace right away to start a war of souls was exactly the importance he attached to Tianjiao. As a powerful country in the world, respecting Qi was the same as respecting Chu. Valuing one's opponent was the same as valuing oneself. As for Tianjiao, which was not an overlord, it naturally could not be considered as an opponent. In North Xiang's sky-traversing twin suns, a picture scroll instantly spread out. It was distant and ancient. There seemed to be the sound of swords and spears, the neighing of war horses, and a rain of arrows filling the sky. This was a secret technique of the Xiang clan, a spiritual killing technique. Riding into the formation map alone, the first thing that appeared on the picture scroll was the battlefield environment. All the details of the scenery were vivid and lifelike in the picture scroll. There were ripples on the sea, and on an unusually vast, isolated island, there was a huge dragon entrenched. This huge dragon was extremely well-nourished. Its divine aura was faint, and its scales and horns were vibrant. This was the foundation of the human body, the foundation of transcendence. It was the Tantian Palace manifested in Tianjiao by Qi. North Xiang's figure, which was holding a halberd, also stepped into the picture scroll. Humans were the manifestation of their spiritual energy. The crow under their legs was also formed by the spiritual energy. Only the halberd in their hands was called unparalleled. It was the weapon of the world's famous general, Xiang Longxiang. In the Battle of the Valley, as the commander of the Chu army, Xiang Longxiang died in the army. His corpse was trampled by thousands of horses, and his head was hung in Xianyang. The glory of his life was destroyed. Only this famous weapon was sent back by him before he died, and he left it to Lin Er of the Xiang clan. Apart from North Xiang, there was no one else who could stop it. At this moment, the halberd spirit, who was holding the unparalleled halberd, manifested. North Xiang rode the crow and entered the formation alone. The horse stepped on the blue waves and leaped to the isolated island. The spiritual energy manifested was still mighty and unyielding. North Xiang rode the horse, raised the halberd high, and smashed it directly at the huge dragon. The Tantian Palace's instinct was to reject outsiders. It was like a small world, and it would naturally protect itself and expel external forces. If the Tantian Palace was compared to a city, it generally did not allow primordial Tao energy, spiritual energy, and other kinds of forces to enter and leave. The guards would only check briefly and usually let them go, because the Tantian Palace was always transmitting forces. It was the source of the human body's power and also the foundation of transcendence. Forbidding the entry and exit of forces was the same as destroying one's martial arts. Using this as an analogy, Jiang Wang's spiritual energy snake invasion was an assassin. He disguised himself as a civilian and sneaked into the city, then revealed his ferocious face. But the Xiang clan's solo cavalry invasion was connected to two Tantian palaces and directly launched a strong attack. In a sense, the solo cavalry invasion secret technique was to build an attack channel, making it possible to launch a strong attack. The difficulty of breaking into the Tantian Palace could not be mentioned in the same breath. The effect that could be achieved was naturally a world of difference. When an assassin sneaked into the city, it would at most cause some disturbances, which could be suppressed easily. When an army broke into the city, it would destroy the city and the country, and change the sun and moon. At this moment, North Xiang relied on the solo cavalry invasion secret technique to attack the Tantian Palace. The Tantian Palace in Tianjiao, Qi, had a strong defense, but it was nothing more than this. Under the gaze of the Polychoria, the weak points were all visible. When the halberd arrived, he directly destroyed it with his halberd and jumped in. He broke into the enemy's city alone. Due to the effect of the solo cavalry invasion secret technique, when he broke into the formation, he had already started to fight for power with the original owner of the Tantian Palace. It was like when an army broke into the enemy's city, the order of the city had to be redefined. It depended on the outcome of the street battle. In other words, the Tantian Palace's protection and rejection of invaders had already been reduced to the weakest level. He only needed to kill the enemy general and plunder the enemy's city. The attack and defense of the Tantian Palace could be compared to siege warfare in the real world, but it could not be completely replaced. For example, no matter when, the Tantian Palace would reject invaders and protect the original owner. Siege warfare in the real world was different. When the city was breached, the support would disappear. The reason why North Xiong could do this and weaken the rejection of the Tantian Palace towards invaders was because of the power of the solo cavalry invasion secret technique. The Xiong clan's secret technique was naturally extraordinary. Inner palace level cultivators would almost never experience the battle of the Tantian Palace. Among the opponents that transcendent cultivators of this level would encounter, cultivators of the same level basically could not invade the Tantian Palace and fight for the power of the Tantian Palace. And the cultivators who could do it did not need to take this risk. There were many simpler ways to kill the opponent. There was no need to forcefully weaken themselves and fight in the opponent's Tantian Palace. The solo cavalry invasion secret technique of the Xiong clan of Great Chu was never something that inner palace cultivators could master. Only North Xiong was an exception. Since he had cultivated this technique, he had never encountered any obstacles. Even a disciple of a famous sect like Do Mian was at a loss when he lost control of the Tantian Palace and was defeated by him. How could there be an accident today? Entering the enemy's city alone, what he saw was naturally different. This was an ancient and majestic Tantian Palace. It was not exquisite or complicated, but it had an ancient aura and a vast heaven and earth. North Xiong rode in on his horse. When he raised his eyes, he saw 9 great Tao spirals like galaxies hung high in the sky and rotated slowly. Starlight flowed like ribbons, deep and distant like a dream. Plump and smoothed out energy was spat out by the Tao spirals from time to time and scattered into the heaven and earth, filling the power reserve of this Tantian Palace. A huge python with dense scales and starlight wrapped around its body was half hanging in one of the Star River spirals, as if it was wearing a halo of starlight. And the python's head was hanging down. A pair of indifferent vertical eyes were looking down at him. On the head of this star-twisting python stood a young man in a green robe. He was holding the manifestation of the sword spirit in his hand. His head was straight and his eyes were calm. He was actually so calm about the power struggle of the Tantian Palace. Through the solo cavalry invasion secret technique, North Xiong could clearly feel the counterattack power coming from the Tantian Palace. Everything was done in an orderly manner. It was like a famous general in the world sitting in the city. Although the city gate was broken, he organized one line of defense after another and calmly counterattacked. Where was the slightest bit of panic? He used the power of the double suns in the sky and the top soul-killing technique like the solo cavalry invasion secret technique. But he could not fight for any power at all. He could only barely ensure that he was not suppressed too much. What North Xiong did not know was Jiang Wang could not be more familiar with the struggle for power in the Tantian Palace. He would never forget it. He had fought with the inner demon who made cultivators pale, and with the deceitful Zhuang Chengxian of the present age, and it was a life and death struggle. Furthermore, if he hadn't opened the gate of the city on purpose, how could Xiang Bei have broken into the city so easily with the power of his soul that had been strengthened multiple times by the red makeup mirror, which was equivalent to a city that was heavily garrisoned? Opening the gate to meet the enemy was naturally to close the gate to beat the dog. At this moment, Jiang Wang was standing on the dome with the star-twisting python under his feet. North Xiong was straddling Wu Kuang on the ground. In the Tantian Palace, the two people, one high and one low, looked at each other. There was no conversation. The soul was the most dangerous fight. In one thought, thousands of twists and turns. In the outside world, it was only a blink of an eye. At the soul level, life and death might have already been determined. North Xiong spurred his warhorse. The horse's hooves were as if it was climbing high steps. Da-da-da. He stepped into the air. From bottom to top, he launched a charge. Just one person and one halberd had the power to kill thousands of soldiers. Jiang Wang, with his hand on his long sword, looked at him coldly, neither dodging nor retreating. North Xiang stared at this Qi Tianjiao. In those clean and calm eyes, he could not see any trembling or fear. In a sense, the Wuquang warhorse, condensed by the soul secret technique, had invaded the authority of the Dao Vein true spirit in the Tongtian Palace. He could clearly sense that the star-twisting python's vertical eyes were already filled with restlessness and uneasiness. However, under the suppression of the Tongtian Palace master, it remained motionless. Everything in front of him undoubtedly showed that the enemy must have a countermeasure. But not only did Norxiang not retreat, he urged Wu Kuang to speed up. Once a charge was launched on the battlefield, there was no turning back. If there was a countermeasure, break it. If there was a trap, step on it. If thousands of soldiers ambushed me, it was nothing more than defeating thousands of soldiers. He was already halfway there, and he had absolute confidence in the combat power of his divine soul. In the face of his surging momentum, Jiang Wang's eyes were still calm. Although his eyes were calm, North Xiang suddenly felt that the end of his charge had turned into a volcano. That enormous soul power, which made him unable to hide his surprise, poured out from his opponent's upright soul original form. This power, this soul power, which was as vast as the deep sea, that covered the sky and covered the earth. Half of it was in the sky, flying as a soul flame sparrow. Half of it was on the ground, swimming as a soul-hiding snake. The soul flame sparrow chirped and flew, and the soul-hiding snake hissed and swam. In an instant, North Xiang had fallen into a tight encirclement. He rode into the formation alone and entered the formation. But this time, it was not so easy to break out of the formation. It was simply unimaginable that an inner mansion cultivator could have such a vigorous soul power. North Xiang was proficient in many soul-killing techniques, and his soul power was also innately extraordinary, often twice as strong as his opponents. But compared to Jiang Wang, they were not on the same level at all. Even in terms of quality, he did not lose at all. Perhaps in terms of soul power, his only advantage was that his control of the soul power was far more exquisite than his opponent's. If the two sides fought openly, he might have a chance to win. But at this moment, he was in his opponent's Tongtian Palace. Riding into the formation alone resisted most of the suppression of the Tongtian Palace, but he also restrained a large part of the soul power. Using war as an analogy, he led 1,000 elite soldiers to break into the city, but needed at least 200 soldiers to guard the city gate. But in the city, there were tens of thousands of strong soldiers waiting for him. His soul-killing technique could be compared to the exquisite art of war, but with such a big gap, his opponent didn't need the art of war. Swarming him was enough to overturn him. In fact, that was exactly what Jiang Wang did. In North Xiang's polychoria, he couldn't see Jiang Wang at all. All the space he could see and feel was filled with soul flame sparrows and soul-hiding snakes. He was proud of the bravery of the world. With his unparalleled halberd, he killed from the south to the north, but he couldn't kill them all. He didn't need any skills at all. With such a vigorous soul power as the support, it was impossible for him to take down this Tongtian Palace. Perhaps after entering the outer tower, the power of the double sun polychoria would surge again and he could break through the situation. But in the inner mansion realm, he couldn't do it. He couldn't hold it for long. North Xiang quickly made a decision. The double sun polychoria vision turned in his eyes, and the single rider formation that had been spread out for a long time was quickly rolled up. His figure with his halberd began to peel away from this scroll. The battle wasn't going well. Retreat. But at this moment, Jiang Wang, who had been standing on the head of the star twining python and hadn't moved, suddenly took a step forward. A moment ago, he was still standing like a pine tree on a cliff, but now he moved like a bough startled by the string. He stepped into the air and pulled out his sword. From top to bottom, the sword cut horizontally. A horizontal line was drawn between heaven and earth. This was the sword style of Chao Yu's hidden saber one kill. It was called 10 Years of Desolation, Life and Death Enmity. The sword cut on the single rider formation. The horizontal line fell on the scroll like a naughty child's childish pen, easily dirtying this painting without cherishing it. Rip, rip. Such a sharp and painful sound rang out at the soul level. The entire single rider entering the battle array was cut open. The ancient and delicate scroll was divided into two parts. One part showed Norxiang's figure holding his halberd and riding his horse, floating out of the Tongtian Palace. The other part showed the scene of the Tongtian Palace, but it fell into the flock of hidden flame sparrows and was instantly torn apart and devoured. The soul battle that took place in the Tongtian Palace was so fierce and dangerous. But in the outside world, only a few breaths had passed. In the eyes of the spectators, they only saw that as soon as Yu Chu announced the start of the battle between the top 8 and the top 4, the fighting was already fierce. And Tianjiao, Qi, and Chu seemed to be frozen. Norxiang and Jiang Wang each stood on one side. They were stunned for a few breaths. Although the pause was short, it was enough to determine life and death for this Tianjiao. What? Those who could come to the river viewing platform to watch the ceremony would not have a low vision. Even if they were not clear, they would understand after listening to others. Tianjiao of Qi and Chu's inner mansion realm were fighting at the soul level, and the initiator of this soul battle was obviously Norxiang. This was an extremely rare confrontation at the outer tower level. Norxiang dared to attack his opponent's Tongtian Palace when he was only at the inner mansion realm, and he could really fight in his opponent's Tongtian Palace. Was there any barrier for him in the divine arrival realm? This was really Tianjiao. Most of the people present could not see the battle at the soul level. What's more, Norxiang had gone deep into Jiang Wang's Tongtian Palace, so the battle in the Tongtian Palace could not be observed by outsiders. Fortunately, these few breaths of time that seemed to have passed quickly while he was in a daze. Many people were still guessing whether Norxiang would be the one who finished the battle first in the battle between the top 8 and the top 4. Even those who had more confidence in Jiang Wang before the battle started could not help but worry that Jiang Wang would be at a disadvantage in this round of confrontation. After all, the Polychoria avatar was rarely seen since ancient times. It was a first-class eye that could control the soul. Yi Lingxiao glanced at her casually and found that his daughter had unknowingly clenched her fists. He pursed his lips and did not say anything. However, after a little more than 2 to 3 breaths of time, the spectators had already seen the tall and burly Norxiang took 3 steps back. His polychoria was tightly shut, and blood flowed from the corners of his eyes like tears. Jiang Wang, dressed in a fluttering green robe, took a step forward and unsheathed Sauvignon. In the soul-level battle, Norxiang, who was born with the double sun polychoria avatar and could attack his opponent's Tongtian Palace at the inner mansion realm, was actually the one who lost. This was simply shocking. Clang! Sauvignon's cry was like a dragon's roar, like the howling of the wind, like golden jade, and like a sonorous clang. This was the first time Sauvignon was unsheathed on the Riverview platform. It seemed to want everyone to hear its voice and see its sharpness. The young man in the green robe who was wielding the sword was high-spirited, confident, and in high spirits. He had a smile on his face and light on his body. A young and frivolous sword cut open the distance on the martial arts practice field and cut open all tangible and intangible obstacles. He was a newborn calf that was not afraid of tigers and leopards, a young man who was proud of life. This was the sublimation of the young and frivolous sword. One could obtain the sword by observing the sword, and oneself by observing the person. This sword slashed forward violently. It cannot be stopped, and it cannot turn back. Everyone who saw this sword could feel its determination and its power. They understood Jiang Qingyang's confidence. Norxiang could not see it. He closed his eyes tightly and was using a secret technique to heal his severely injured eyes. With the double sun polychoria avatar, he was always at a disadvantage in the soul-level battle. This made him look down on the heroes of the world and completely did not consider the possibility of losing in the soul-level battle. In fact, He had indeed never lost in the soul-level battle. Today, he tasted defeat for the first time. Moreover, he had almost been killed in the Heavenspan Palace. A battle on the soul level usually only lasted for an instant. Presumably, even a true monarch would have to be careful if he wanted to save the life of the loser. Of course, the concept of time was different for inner palace cultivators and Dao-favored experts. But whether or not Yu Qian could make it in time, he had almost lost. He was almost defeated in a single exchange. This was the price he had to pay for his arrogance. The price was not only that. Half of the single rider entering formation diagram had been cut. It would take at least a year of hard work to repair it. He would not be able to use it in the future battles. Of course, he would not enter Jiang Wang's Heavenspan Palace to throw away his life. At this moment, fresh blood flowed from the corner of his eyes. He closed his eyes and observed the battle from a different angle and on a different level. Qi Jiang Wang's sword gave him a familiar feeling. With a thought, he connected it to the battle between the Mu state's Tianjiao and the Wei state's Tianjiao. This sword was very proud of itself. In his mind, a picture scroll slowly unfurled. In the picture scroll was a man in a green robe, proudly wielding his sword. Front, side, front, back, looking up, every angle appeared on the picture scroll. One Jiang Wang after another. The Xiang clan's secret inheritance, the demonic dragon weaponry formation. It was used as a support in battle to control the enemy's situation and predict the enemy's moves. North Xiang, whose eyes were closed, stretched out his hand. The unparalleled halberd's body appeared in his hand, and he held it tightly. Black smoke climbed on his face. The blood flowing from the corner of his eyes, and even his entire eyes, were covered by black ghost patterns. His muscles violently swelled, and half of his martial attire exploded. His upper body was bare, and his terrifying muscles were knotted together, and his veins were like dragons and snakes. Originally, he was 8 feet tall and mighty. Now he had grown to 12 feet tall. Black smoke coiled around his body, faintly discernible. A terrifying aura instantly intimidated everyone. Divine ability, tyrannical body of seizing thieves. A human body had 7 souls, and the 4th soul of seizing thieves was also the soul of strength. This supernatural power greatly weakened all negative effects, including injuries, restraints, poisons, pain, and infinite strength. It was known as no internal thief dies, no external thief invades. It was a top-notch killing supernatural power. All of this happened slowly, but in fact, it happened in an instant. North Xiang was defeated in the Battle of Souls, and Jiang Wang immediately attacked with a young sword style, which he had just sublimated not long ago. He was unforgiving and pursued relentlessly, trying to kill him. North Xiang immediately unfolded the demonic dragon weapon formation and revealed the tyrannical body of seizing thieves. The unparalleled halberd rose like a giant dragon, like a high wall rising from the ground, or a high mountain rising from the plains. It was firmly placed in front of him. Great Chu's Xiang clan's heirloom, the 8 Desolation No Return halberd. This halberd technique was once known as the Karma Blade technique. In history, they had fought several times, and it was difficult to determine who was better. The proud sword could not be blocked, but this halberd blocked the proud sword. Clang! The tip of Chang Xiangxi's sword pierced the surface of the halberd. After a clang, the scene was silent for a moment. The unparalleled halberd was a Fangtian halberd with crescent blades on both sides. In everyone's vision, the huge halberd surface of the unparalleled halberd blocked the way. It blocked in front of North Xiang's burly face, and the body of Chang Xiangxi's sword just happened to touch one of the halberd blades. This block seemed to be lifting something heavy as if it were light, and it was extremely ingenious. However, only North Xiang knew how powerful Jiang Wang's sword was. He had used the tyrannical body of seizing thieves and used the demonic dragon weapon drill portrait to seize the opportunity. However, he was only able to use the 8 Desolation halberd technique to block the sword when it was in front of him. However, Even though the process was not simple, it was still a matter of stopping them. When he was defeated in the Battle of Souls and was seriously injured, he was still able to block the sword without suffering any damage. This meant that at least at this moment, he had an overwhelming advantage in the face of this sword. Young Gunzuin, who was watching the battle from outside, seemed to have just recovered from his serious injury. He could not bear it for long, and he leaned back gently. He wasn't surprised that Jiang Wang was able to turn the tables in the battle for the spirit. He had long known that Jiang Wang's soul was extraordinarily powerful. In the battle in his Tongtian palace, it was impossible for him to lose to any opponent of the same level. North Xiang rashly broke into Jiang Wang's Tongtian palace, so he could only suffer the consequences of his own actions. However, he could not ignore North Xiang's effortless halberd. Today, the world should know that the 7 fighting styles were not the only powerful killing techniques in the Great Chu Empire. There's also the 8 Desolation halberd technique, especially North Xiang, who did not look injured at all now. He was obviously seriously injured, but he could still perform at his peak. This was an expert who had really experienced life and death, the performance of both sides. He was looking forward to the next development very much. At this moment, North Xiang, who had used the tyrannical body of seizing thieves, was almost like a god and a demon surrounded by black smoke. In comparison, Jiang Wang, who was in a green robe and wielding a sword, looked so weak and dangerous. However, Chang Xiangxi forward. The tip of the sword pointed at the lower crescent blade of the unparalleled halberd, deflecting it inwards and aiming at North Xiang's face with its sharpness. This was a difficult move forward, but the sword was still moving forward. However, North Xiang opened his eyes. Surrounded by the black ghost patterns, his double sun sky traversing Polychoria looked even more mysterious. He glanced at Jiang Wang indifferently. His right hand, which was tightly knotted with muscles, twisted slightly. The blade of the unparalleled halberd suddenly rebounded and straightened. A huge and terrifying force counterattacked Chang Xiangxi. Jiang Wang was sent flying several feet away with his sword. Bang! It was the sound of North Xiang stepping on the ground. He stepped on the ground of the training field, making a muffled sound like a heavy drum. In the next moment, he had already caught up with Jiang Wang. He raised his halberd and chopped down. In the air, the blue cloud mark flashed and disappeared. Jiang Wang was still flying backward, but it was as if he was walking on flat ground. With a slight turn, the halberd missed its target. Then he turned around and slashed horizontally. This sword was too beautiful, too elegant. In front of the terrifying heavy halberd, it floated like an immortal. It was like a wild scholar who had abandoned all restraint, splashing ink and writing while drunk. It was just a stroke, a horizontal stroke. The human Tao, sword style, famed scholar down and out. 10 years of abject poverty, using life and death to provoke enemies. The sword that split a single rider into a formation in Tongtian Palace reappeared on the field. North Xiang's halberd missed its target. He immediately let go of his left hand and held the halberd's tail with his right hand. Clang! He managed to block the sword. Of course, this wasn't enough. He could block the sword, but he couldn't block the sword's momentum and sword intent. Therefore, roaring black smoke surged in the unparalleled halberd, and a terrifying halberd intent erupted. He flipped his right hand and held it in his left hand. The unparalleled halberd spun in a large circle in the air, suddenly roaring with endless killing intent. 8 Desolation halberd technique, West Extreme style. The image of a solemn white tiger appeared and disappeared. The unparalleled halberd roared and pounced toward Jiang Wang's face. Everyone, including North Xiang himself, was waiting for Jiang Wang's reaction. However, Jiang Wang seemed to be scared out of his wits. At this moment, he retreated and sheathed his sword. 2 figures, one tall and one short, flew swiftly through the air. One advanced, the other retreated. One hacked furiously with his halberd, the other sheathed his sword. One was shrouded in black smoke, like a god or a demon. The other wore a blue robe and walked leisurely. Only the wind whistled. What does he want to do? Go easy on him? Someone in Chi's spectator group asked. This person was a disciple of the Chow family side branch. He had specially come to the Riverview platform to watch the ceremony. Apart from a few battles, he wasn't familiar with Jiang Wang. Of course, he had high hopes for Tianjiao's victory. However, at this moment, it seemed that Jiang Qingyang was deliberately going easy on him. He couldn't understand. In the face of this halberd, he shouldn't have retreated no matter what. This didn't suit his choice, so he even said something like go easy on him. What kind of occasion was the Yellow River Conference? Who dared to abandon their country's dignity and go easy on the Riverview platform? Some people were like this. Their minds were so barren that they lacked the ability to think. As long as they didn't see what they wanted, they would say go easy on him. However, it was also difficult to distinguish whether this kind of person was stupid or bad. Cheng Gung Sheng said indifferently, there's no need to ask what Jiang Qingyang wants to do. In battle, he always does the right thing. He turned his head and looked at this person. What's your name? Stupid should be scolded, bad should be killed. This person didn't dare to speak. Li Longchuan's voice sounded at this moment, but it was much colder and shorter. Divine power. It was an explanation for the others who were also puzzled. With Jinwei, he could easily see details that ordinary people couldn't see. This included the fire essence that was faintly trembling around Jiang Wang at this moment. As for Jiang Wang, who was stepping on the blue clouds and retreating quickly, he naturally had no intention of giving up a battle. He had never been afraid of a battle. Among all the sword moves of the human Tao, the famous Scholar Sword and the Young Scholar Sword were now the two most powerful swords after sublimation. One sword slashed horizontally, the other sword slashed vertically. One sword was down and out and full of hatred, the other was the pride of a young and frivolous life. One sword was the power to divide life and death. The other was the power to be unstoppable. These two moves were almost on par with the 8 Desolation No Return Halberd, a supreme halberd technique. Or more accurately, in Jiang Wang's hands, they could compete with the 8 Desolation No Return Halberd technique in the hands of Tianjiao like North Xiang. He slashed out the peak of the human Dao sword move, but North Xiang couldn't truly display the perfection of the 8 Desolation No Return Halberd. However, this was already a great achievement, indicating that the human Dao sword technique already had the potential to become a supreme sword technique. However, it stopped here for the time being. Facing the 8 Desolation No Return Halberd controlled by the tyrannical body of Thief, the current human Dao sword move couldn't continue. A sword like Zhangxi wasn't meant to be smashed against a heavy halberd like Peerless. Therefore, Jiang Wang sheathed his sword and hid his intention in his heart. He used the instant clear sky immortal technique to retreat 50 feet. North Xiang's West Pole halberd also chased after him for 50 feet. This was a distance of 50 feet where danger lurked in every direction. One's power decreased, the other's power increased. The battle seemed to have reached its end, and the large halberd was almost facing him. 8 Desolation and 6 directions, reaching the West Pole. And Jiang Wang opened his mouth and spat. This was a dazzling spectacle. A scarlet seed blossomed into a beautiful flame flower. Chirp, chirp, chirp. When the flame flower blossomed, flame sparrows that looked like they were carved from scarlet jade flew out, chirping. The foundation of fire, the life force of fire. Star power surged into the sky, and totem power consolidated into the earth. The sky was round, and the earth was round, the only one in this world. Volcanoes erupted, and seas of fire roared. Meteors streaked across the sky, and flame sparrows cried out in all directions. The world of fire had descended. Chapter 1155. At the west entrance of the stage of the world, a man and a woman, 2 young people in gorgeous clothes, walked in. The woman walking in front looked dignified and noble. She had phoenix eyes, thin willow eyebrows, an oval face, and a tall figure. The young man walking behind her was slightly shorter by half a head. His temperament was clean, and his facial features were handsome. Although his face was still young, it could be seen that he would be a rare handsome man in a few years. As he walked, he grumbled, "I said I didn't want to come, but you insisted on dragging me here. What's there to see? You're disturbing my practice." The woman walking in front tugged at him. "Hurry up. Hey, don't pull my hand." The young man was a little shy. He lowered his voice and said anxiously, "There are so many people." The woman in front suddenly turned back and stared at the young man. The young man subconsciously shrank back, but his hand was tightly held, and he could not move away. The beautiful woman raised her slender and smooth index finger and pressed it against her lips. "Shoo!" Then she moved her index finger and pointed at the supreme Dharma form beside the pillar of 6 directions. She pointed at the red dragon robe with complicated patterns, which was worn by the Emperor of Chu. She told the young man that the Emperor of Chu was present, so he should not talk nonsense. Then she continued to pull him forward and squeezed into the spectators of the Chu kingdom. The young man walked unwillingly at the back, lowering his head and eyes. He wished that the whole world did not know him. Suddenly, he heard the cry of a flame sparrow. This familiar sound, he turned his head and looked at the martial arts arena. A world full of vitality and fire covered his vision. His eyes suddenly lit up. It was not just this young man. In the eyes of the spectators, North Xiang slashed out with the halberd of the West Pole. This halberd was from here to the west. Everything is under the halberd. It was really domineering. It was a move that led to a dead end and could not be avoided. It was bound to crush the opponent. Jiang Wang could not get rid of it even with the celestial technique, meteoric rise. But in the next moment, the red flames had already covered the entire martial arts arena. The flames seemed to have a spirit, flowing vigorously and catalyzing everything. Heaven and earth combined, and the flames formed a world of their own. North Xiang's halberd could reach the West Pole, but he was also enveloped by the world of fire. The concept of the West Pole was also in the fire world. As the halberd fell, countless streams of fire were separated. Flame sparrow peck, meteor fall. All kinds of fire elemental Taoist techniques attacked the heavy halberd in a frenzy. Every inch it moved forward consumed a great deal of strength. It was as if he had to travel across mountains and rivers to get close to his opponent. If it wasn't for the tyrannical body of Thief Devourer, which made him invulnerable, this move would have been destroyed prematurely. When North Xiang's extreme west power finally came to an end, he came to the end of the extreme west of the fire world. Jiang Wang's retreating footsteps came to a halt. He no longer retreated, nor did he evade. Instead, he advanced forward. He took a light step forward. When he stepped out, he raised his left hand and raised the somniferous yearning sword to meet the attack with its scabbard. When the divine dragon wooden sword scabbard collided with the unparalleled halberd, his footsteps came to a halt. Bang! His light step actually created a heavy impact on the martial arts stage. As for the sheathed long sword he held in one hand, it was as if it was made of iron and stone. Wherever it extended, it would stop there, unwavering. An arrow at the end of its flight couldn't pierce through the cloth. With the power of the tyrannical body of Thief Devourer, the strength of the 8 Desolation No Return halberd, and North Xiang's innate physique, the unparalleled halberd couldn't move the divine dragon wooden scabbard at all. And Jiang Wang drew his sword again. He raised the scabbard with his left hand and drew his sword with his right hand to advance further. The sword of a swordsman. Raise it in the scabbard and kill it when it's out of the scabbard. Suddenly, a cold light appeared. Then, like the setting sun, it burned away the afterglow. It was tragic and stirring. This was the first move of the human path sword style, old general past his prime. This was the most tragic move of the human path sword style. It was also the move with the most sudden burst and the fastest speed. Jiang Wang often used this move as a starting move. Facing a top-notch Tianjiao, like North Xiang, the human path sword style that hadn't been sublimated in the past was beyond his reach. But this time it was different. On the somniferous yearning snow sword, there was a red line of fire on the spine of the sword. The power of the fire world was held in the sword. Red and white, so bright and beautiful. This sword was heavy and brave. It was as if it was narrating the story of this fire world. This fire world had a history that was both praiseworthy and tragic. This sense of history undoubtedly enriched the foundation of this world, making it more realistic and vivid. There was once a white-haired old general who died for his country with his old body. He was dead, but his spirit was still there. Even if they were life and death opponents on the battlefield, they couldn't not respect him. His spine supported the broken world. His bravery was the setting sun of the fire world. This sword carried the power of the fire world and suddenly came. North Xiang raised his halberd to block. Clang! The tip of the sword collided with the halberd. North Xiang was directly knocked back several zhang. Many people outside the field widened their eyes and even couldn't help but exclaim. This was North Xiang under the tyrannical body of Thief. He was actually knocked back by a sword. How terrifying was this sword? Before they could finish being surprised, the handsome Tianjiao in the green robe had already stepped on the green clouds and chased forward. The matchless halberd spun in North Xiang's hand, and the tip of the halberd rose up. Such a heavy halberd in his hand was as light as a piece of grass. But its power was like stirring the sea and moving the mountains, shaking thousands of li. The heaven-flipping move of the 8 Desolation halberd technique. This move was incomparably valiant. North Xiang glared at it. Against everything, against all directions. Heaven wants to suppress me, overturn the sky. Jiang Wang's figure suddenly swayed and floated in the strong wind like a green duckweed. From extreme bravery to extreme powerlessness, it was so natural, light, and wonderful. It floated and swayed in the heaven-flipping halberd, but refused to be destroyed. Not only did it refuse to be destroyed, but when it was weak and swaying, it suddenly emitted a cold light. Although it couldn't control itself, it didn't forget to fight. The spectators were mesmerized by such an exciting confrontation. This halberd power is a bit weak, not like North Xiang's strength. He's so badly injured that even the tyrannical body of Thief can't suppress it. On the circular stand, among the spectators of Chu State, a young man of medium height frowned and said so. 2 figures appeared in his peripheral vision. His eyebrows relaxed, and he said in surprise, Shenhua, Guangshu, you're here too? Chu Shenhua still held Zhuo Guangshu with one hand and put the index finger of the other hand in front of her lips. Chu. She squeezed a few steps forward and sat next to the man who spoke. It could be seen that they had a good relationship. Zhuo Guangshu let her hold him and sat down as well. His eyes were fixed on a martial arts platform, and he was totally immersed in it. In the present world, on an occasion like the meeting of the Yellow River, he saw the blossoming of the fire world with his own eyes. He, who had practiced the water world technique for a long time, was intoxicated for a moment. This technique was really too exquisite and vivid. The more he thought about it, the more he felt its potential was infinite. In the eyes of some people outside the arena, North Xiang's attack was not as good as before, and they thought it was caused by his injury. But perhaps only North Xiang himself, who was in the arena, could feel the difficulty. His spirit was indeed badly damaged, but he could ignore it for the time, being in the state of the tyrannical body of seizing thieves. It just limited more of his spirit methods, but didn't affect his performance in other aspects. This was nothing. He would never try to rush into Jiang Wang's Tongtian Palace again. He was just using the demonic dragon weapon drill picture to strengthen his ability to seize opportunities. However, the whole world of fire was resisting and suppressing him. The tyrannical body of seizing thieves weakened this suppression greatly, but North Xiang could still feel the heavy pressure in the black smoke. The West Extreme move was easily cut off, and the heaven-flipping move was easily broken. It was all because of the suppression on himself and the support on the other side. It was hard to imagine how long he could last in this world of fire if he didn't have the tyrannical body of seizing thieves. This feeling was the same as when he invaded the Tongtian Palace on his own. The sky was about to fall, the earth was about to be overturned, and the whole world was his enemy. The situation could be similar, but North Xiang couldn't accept the result of the battle. Facing Jiang Wang's sword thrust from the heaven-flipping move, North Xiang let go of the unparalleled halberd. At the right time, black smoke curled around him, and he, who was 20 feet tall, was suspended in the sky. The unparalleled halberd was suspended in front of him. The green-robed figure was already floating over. North Xiang put his palms together. Behind him, a 9-headed, human-faced, bird-bodied figure flashed. And in front of him, an iceberg rose from the ground. In a world of fire, when a water element was completely expelled, an iceberg rose from the ground. If it weren't for the tyrannical body of seizing thieves, the thief inside cannot die. It would be impossible to do this. This mountain was called the North Pole Heavenly Cabinet. This technique also had the same name as the mountain. According to legend, the divine bird 9 phoenixes lived on this famous mountain. The Chu State's techniques were the best in the world. At the inner mansion level, this Taoist technique could be said to be one of the strongest defenses. This iceberg seemed to be holding up the sky of the world of fire. Of course, it was fiercely resisting the world of fire. Jiang Wang's struggling sword hit the North Pole Heavenly Cabinet Mountain, making an extremely crisp and sharp sound. The flowing line of fire, Sauvignon longing, pierced an inch into the iceberg. Jiang Wang had already pulled out his sword. When Sauvignon longing pierced an inch into the North Pole Heavenly Cabinet Mountain, Jiang Wang already felt the defensive strength of this iceberg in front of him. He quickly made a decision. He stopped his involuntary momentum and pulled out his sword to change his move. Cold light flashed. After losing control of his body, he attacked with 2 swords in succession. One sword slashed horizontally, and the other pierced straight. A famous scholar in decline, young and frivolous. How strong were these 2 sublimated human sword moves, supported by the power of the world of fire? In a world of fire, where flame sparrows flew and flame flowers bloomed, a cold and hard iceberg rose from the ground, towering. And between heaven and earth, a horizontal line was drawn. On the indestructible iceberg, cracks spread like a spider web, and then a hole appeared. Boom! The North Pole Heavenly Cabinet Mountain collapsed. But in the Battle of Tianjiao, everyone had their own methods. While using the North Pole Heavenly Cabinet Mountain to block the enemy, North Xiang didn't stay idle. He erected the iceberg, but rose into the sky. He couldn't win the battle of the divine soul in Jiang Wang's heavenly palace, and he couldn't defeat Jiang Wang in the world of fire. It was because the power of heaven and earth was different, and the whole world was his enemy. Now, he had to admit that it was impossible for him to win against an opponent like Jiang Wang. So he naturally had to retreat from the unfavorable terrain. However, this world of fire was full of vitality. It was self-contained and operated as one. Even with the help of the demonic dragon weaponry exercise chart, he couldn't see any flaws in a short time. He chose to attack. Holding the unparalleled halberd, his tall and sturdy figure flew toward the sky. Black smoke swam, resisting the rolling heat. Countless flame sparrows flew and swooped down, blocking his path. Rumbling meteors fell like rain. Feeling the delay of the tyrannical body of seizing thief, North Xiang gripped the long pole tightly. At this moment, the crescent blades on both sides of the unparalleled halberd suddenly flashed with a green light. The whole bright blade of the unparalleled halberd was immediately dyed with a green smoke. The halberd didn't move, but there were already faint black marks in the space where the halberd was facing. That was a sign that it was about to split open. Magical power, green blade of breaking spell. This magical power only had a very simple effect, doubt breaking spell. The unparalleled halberd waved casually, and the flock of flame sparrows collapsed and collapsed. The falling meteors in the sky were split in half by the unparalleled halberd while they were still high in the sky. The falling meteors all avoided the unparalleled halberd and fell around North Xiang, but they couldn't touch him at all. The tall and sturdy tyrannical body of seizing thief, emitting black smoke, flew in the noisy and hot world of fire. Along the way, the meteors were shattered, and the flame sparrows turned into ashes. The unparalleled halberd with the green blade of breaking spell was unstoppable wherever it went. All kinds of fire elemental Tao techniques evolved in the world of fire couldn't even slow it down. The unparalleled halberd was like a sharp knife cutting through thin paper without any hindrance. Nothing could stop it, and no technique could stop it. This scene was really like a god descending to the world, and he was so awe-inspiring. The combination of the tyrannical body of seizing thief and the green blade of breaking spell had the potential to be invincible. At the same time as the North Pole's heavenly cabinet mountain collapsed, North Xiang also rushed to the limit of the sky of the world of fire. Holding the heavy halberd with one hand, he fiercely stabbed it into the sky. Rumble. The sound of world-destroying thunder suddenly resounded. The endless rain of fire circled around North Xiang's sturdy body, as if it was also afraid of him. The flaming meteors that streaked across the sky came to an abrupt stop. The blooming flame flowers all over the world withered one by one. The flame sparrows flying everywhere collapsed one by one. The whole world of fire started to disintegrate. The world of fire was broken. Using the tyrannical body of seizing thief and the green blade of breaking spell, he broke the opponent's world of fire and stood proudly in the sky. At this moment, North Xiang's momentum was undoubtedly at its peak. Unparalleled bravery, unparalleled in the world. The people of Chu State outside the field almost cheered for him. But North Xiang, who was like a god or a demon on the field, lowered his head in shock. He had already seen, in the withered flame flowers, in the broken flame sparrows, in the flaming light all over the sky and on the ground, in the collapsing world of fire, a figure suddenly rushed out. A pair of calm, clear, and unwavering eyes. A clean, tidy, and form-fitting green robe. A sword with a handle as dark as the night, and a blade as bright as the moon. This person was obviously rushing so fast and in such a hurry, but there was a kind of calm, immortal air about him, as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. Clumps of green cloud marks appeared and then disappeared. This person climbed up the sky, stepping on the stairway to heaven. Behind him was the smoke and fire of the whole world of fire. The line of fire on the spine of the sword had disappeared, indicating that it had lost the support of the world of fire. But North Xiang's polychoria clearly saw that there was a touch of frost in the white of the sword. The white of the moon and the white of frost were both white, almost indistinguishable. The only difference was that the white of the moon was clearer, while the white of the frost was colder. This difference could not be hidden from North Xiang's polychoria. But frost? The speed at which Jiang Wang broke through the North Pole to a mountain was beyond imagination. The collapsing world of fire also completely covered his traces. This was a sword that could be said to be perfect timing. This sword was too fast and too ruthless. It was almost at North Xiang's body when he saw it. So he was stunned. He subconsciously reversed the unparalleled halberd, and his body instinctively made the fastest reaction. The earth carried everything with great virtue. If the earth has no virtue, I will overturn it. The earth-overturning halberd of the Eight Desolation had already covered it. At this time, the world of fire had collapsed. In the absence of any suppression, he used the mighty body of Thief to control the Eight Desolation of the halberd of the Eight Desolation. He was not afraid of any challenge. What he faced was a familiar sword. This was the sword of the young and frivolous. This was the sword of pride after stepping on the stairway to heaven and earth. He had already seen and recognized the power of this sword. Outside the world of fire, he was full of confidence to face it with the earth-overturning halberd. The halberd and sword met. This scene seemed to be still. The unparalleled halberd and Xiangxi met in the sky. One was from top to bottom, overturning the world. The other was from bottom to top, climbing higher step by step. North Xiang's tall and burly figure was like a god or a demon. Jiang Wang's calm figure never looked back. Behind Jiang Wang was the destruction of the world of fire. It was the collapse of the entire bright world. In front of him was the brave and peerless tyrannical body of devouring thieves. But he climbed higher, but he moved forward. His momentum was unstoppable and unstoppable. I came to the Yellow River to climb the stairway to heaven. I don't want no heroes in the world. I must let the world know my name. At this time, the flames dissipated and fire filled the sky. The life and death of a bright world. The head-on confrontation between two peerless Tianjiao. This scene was so beautiful and so shocking that it almost made people forget to breathe. Then, there seemed to be the sound of wind. The sound was too soft. It should have been annihilated in the terrifying noise of the halberd and sword colliding. But the sound of the wind was too cold. It made people feel a chill in their bones and lingered. It was clear in the loud noise. That was the lonely sound of life withering. Whoosh, the moment the halberd and sword collided. A wisp of frosty white wind left Xiang Xi's sword and blew through the opening of the peerless halberd. It turned into a pitch-black long nail with a frosty white tip and nailed into North Xiang's abdomen. The mighty body of thief said that no internal thief would die and no external thief would invade. It was just a materialized long nail. Even a supernatural power like Bu Zhou Feng couldn't. This thought just flashed through North Xiang's mind. Puff! He raised his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. What he spat out was not only blood, but also black smoke that whistled endlessly. That was the soul of the seizing thief that was beginning to collapse. The killing nail was annihilating his life spirit. The mighty body of thief was broken by a nail, and the injuries that he had suppressed earlier also broke out at the same time. A clear light shrouded North Xiang. It stopped the killing nail that was still raging in North Xiang's body and helped to stabilize his life spirit. The immortal Yu Qian had made his move. The outcome had been decided. But Jiang Wang still took a step forward and approached North Xiang. It seemed that he was trying to break through Yu Qian's barrier and kill him here. But he just stretched out a hand. There was only a flame flower blooming in his palm. It was so beautiful and delicate, but in a battle of this level, it couldn't be considered a powerful flame flower. It was the flame flower created by Zhuo Guanglia of Tianjiao of the Chu dynasty and now imitated by the whole world. This flame flower that was full of vitality pressed against North Xiang's arrogant face through the hazy, clear light. It pressed him down and made him fall. You know what it is? Jiang Wang said faintly. Then he grabbed the killing nail that had penetrated the mighty body of thief and scattered it into the wind, keeping it in his body. He sheathed his sword, turned around calmly, and walked down from the sky. North Xiang, who was shrouded in clear light, had a flame flower blooming on his face and was falling straight down, his body still emitting black smoke. He became the background of the green-robed young man in this scene. Chapter 1156. On the grandstand of Chu Yuji, who was born in the army, sighed. Although he had also been defeated by North Xiang, he had also been despised and humiliated by this arrogant guy many times. However, on the Riverview platform, he still hoped that Tianjiao of Chu would win. Someone as strong as Dou Zhao had lost the championship, which broke the hearts of the Chu people. How could the Inner Mansion stop in the top 8? However, he couldn't find a reason to win this match. North Xiang was indeed weaker than his opponent. He lost at the beginning, and his polychoria was greatly restricted. He couldn't use his strongest soul-killing technique, which was an important reason for his defeat. However, North Xiang, who had been born with polychoria and was known for his powerful soul-killing technique, was defeated in a soul battle, which was enough to show how terrifying his opponent was. Qi's lineup this time was really shocking. Sitting next to Chu Yuji, Chu Shanhua, who had just come to the grandstand halfway through the battle, was expressionless. Since she chose to hide her strength in the domestic competition, she didn't look forward to the outcome of the Yellow River competition. Only Zhuo Guangshu, who was forcefully dragged by Chu Shanhua to the grandstand, was staring at the grandstand in a daze. Of course, he understood what Jiang Wang meant when he said those strange words on the grandstand. Of course, He remembered what Jiang Wang said after he talked about North Xiang in the Great Illusionary Land. At that time, he said, "I'll help you teach him a lesson later." It sounded like he was coaxing a child. At that time, he snorted after North Xiang defeated him. He said, "I hate that Zhuo Guanglia died early. I hate that the Zhuo family has withered, and I hate that there are no flame flowers in the world." He mocked the Zhuo family for having no successors and mocked Zhuo Guangshu for being mediocre. Jiang Wang pressed a flame flower on his face in front of the world and told North Xiang that the flame flower had never withered. When Zhuo Guangshu saw Jiang Wang in the real world today, he wanted to find a chance to mock him. Why was Duge Wudi, the #1 intermansion expert in the Great Illusionary Land, so vain and obsessed with his appearance? He made his image in the Great Illusionary Land so handsome that it didn't look like him at all. But now he only felt that. The image in the Great Illusionary Realm was just so. At this moment, Jiang Wang was truly dazzling and breathtaking. It was also warm, like the sun. "What's wrong?" Chu Shanhua noticed Zhuo Guangshu's strange behavior and asked aloud. Zhuo Guangshu didn't move his gaze. He only murmured, "Very similar, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" Chu Shanhua had already thought of the answer after he subconsciously asked this question. She also looked at the martial arts stage but didn't say anything. She just squeezed Zhuo Guangshu's hand tightly. Just like that, the battle between the geniuses of Qi and Chu came to an end. Only Jiang Qingyang, who was descending from the clouds, still had a calm look in his eyes and a calm gait. It was as if he had never changed, as if nothing could change him. At this moment, such an upright figure dressed in a green robe and wielding a sword seemed to radiate with boundless radiance. Huang Shelley, who was half squatting on a martial arts platform to the side and watching the battle, could not help but be stunned for a moment. Behind her was Tao Ji, whose hands and feet were broken, 3 puppets were shattered, and 2 strange beasts were dead. She originally wanted to end the battle quickly and come to see this Qi Jiang Wang make a fool of himself. This person was not handsome enough, but he dared to steal the limelight from her, Huang Shelley, and the attention of 2 great beauties. He even dared to provoke her. It was simply outrageous. Of course, the former problem was more serious than the latter two. But she blinked her eyes. Why did he look so good now? Some people were beautiful in appearance, some in bone structure, and some in spirit. She suddenly remembered that when this prodigy named Jiang Wang sat side by side with the peerless Ji Zhaonan and the peerless Zhong Xianzun, he didn't seem to be out of place, nor did he seem to be overshadowed. He always had his unique style. It was just that she, Huang Shelley, was stared at by the peerless beauties and neglected him. Sigh. In fact, stealing the limelight was understandable. Who didn't want to show off in front of others during the Yellow River gathering? As for provocation, they were all young people. It was inevitable that they would be a little angry. If there was a misunderstanding, it would be fine. Why bother? Cough. She was about to stand up. Suddenly, she heard a loud shout. Jiang Qingyang. This shout was so loud that it could even be said to be heart-wrenching. The atmosphere was completely gone. Huang Shelley turned her head angrily and saw a man with an extremely high forehead on Qi's side. His face was red as he waved his arms and shouted continuously, Jiang Qingyang, Jiang Qingyang, Jiang Qingyang. So what if he had never won? As for Huang Shelley's fierce gaze, Su Gao did not see it at all. There were too many people looking at him in the entire world stage. He was the other pride of the Mount Haste duo. Did he have to pay attention to them one by one? It was inevitable that a sword would be sought after by the world. Therefore, he just cupped his hands and said, I'm Su Xianqian of the Mount Haste duo. Nice to meet you. Many people from other countries frowned in confusion. Did you think we were greeting you? Some bad-tempered people rolled up their sleeves and were about to stand up. The man with the high forehead said with a smile, the so-called Mount Haste duo is Jiang Qingyang and I, Su Xianqian. My Qingyang just performed casually. Please don't laugh at him. Many people fell silent at that moment. North Xiang of Tianjiao of the Chu dynasty defeated by Yu Xiao of Tianjiao of the Yu kingdom with 3 punches. He could force his way into the opponent's Tongtian Palace as an inner mansion. Such a top Tianjiao lost cleanly in the hands of Jiang Wan. From the battle of the spirit to the battle of the body, he lost completely. This guy could be as famous as Jiang Qingyang. He must not be weak. In the entire world stage, the people with the highest status would not care about the young people shouting in excitement. Some of the strong people who could easily teach Su Xiangqian a lesson were generally willing to give face to the great scholar Emoya. The younger generation did not know Su Xiangqian's background, but it was inevitable that they would be afraid of Jiang Wan. Therefore, when Su Xiangqian cupped his hands, there were actually a few people who smiled and returned the greeting. Most people silently retracted their gazes. They all took it as a sparrow chirping. On the martial arts stage, Jiang Wan himself was a little surprised. Who wants to be as famous as you? I remember that I laughed on the spot and skipped over it. Even if you want to be as famous as me, you don't have to call them Mount Haste. That's a graveyard mountain. It's inauspicious, Brother Gao. But he had just won a place in the top 4. Under the eyes of everyone, he could not ignore everything else and specially emphasize this. He could only try to maintain the smile on his face and pretend that he did not hear. His face was full of, I don't know, it's not me, nothing happened. After Su Xiangqian cupped his hands in salute, he sat down again and found that there was no one within 30 feet of him. Li Longquan, Cheng Gengsheng, and the like looked at the sky and the ground. Yin Fu turned his head to the other side and whispered something to Wendinglan. Flirting was strange and annoying. It was only Brother Yin. If it was someone else, Su Xiangqian, would definitely torment them. He turned back to look at Senior Sister Zhao. Senior Sister Zhao also pulled Miss Ji Shu and sat far away. Su Xiangqian shook his head and sighed. The psychological quality of these friends was too bad. Let me bear this attention alone. He said this in a low voice. His back was straighter and his head was higher. Of course, his forehead was also brighter. Chapter 1157. When Jiang Wang slowly walked down from the high ground, Deng Qi was looking at him. Xia Wan from Shui country was lying on the ground, barely breathing. In front of her, there were pieces of icicles scattered all over the ground. It was her broken sword. It was obvious that she had tried her best. Deng Qi didn't show any mercy to such a beautiful and sorrowful beauty, who was born to be pitiful. He could be called a model of ruthless destruction. Helian Yunyun, who was in the spectator seats, was smiling. Huang Shelley, who was in the martial arts arena next door, was full of hatred. He had already warned Deng Qi with his eyes several times. Victory or defeat on the stage was naturally based on each person's means, so there was no need to show mercy. But after the outcome was decided, he should at least give the beauty some dignity. Couldn't he help her? What's wrong with giving her a coat? Of course, if Deng Qi really did that. Huang Shelley couldn't help but feel that this person had ulterior motives and was shameless. In short, Miss Huang was kind and couldn't bear to see the beauty suffer. The only pity was Deng Qi didn't even look at her. From beginning to end, he was staring at the battle of Qi and Chu in Tianjiao. Of course, he didn't notice her threatening eyes. Huang Shelley was so angry. He could only watch the battle of Qi and Chu in Tianjiao. His gaze moved from one annoying person to another. Of course, after watching this battle, the misunderstanding was unilaterally resolved. The annoying person in Qi was no longer so annoying. The annoying person in Mu country was still annoying. And every time he looked at the miserable state of Xia Wan from Shui country, he felt that the person in Mu country was even more annoying. Wearing such an ugly mask, he must be even uglier. It was hard to say whether Deng Qi felt the hostility of Jing country's Huang Shelley, but he definitely didn't care at all. Today, he wanted to win the championship in the Yellow River meeting. Everyone in the Inner Mansion arena was his opponent, except third brother Jiang. He hoped that Jiang Wang could go to the end and meet him in the finals, but he didn't want to fight with Jiang Wang on the same stage. His feelings were really complicated. In the 4 battles of the top 8, the first to end was Deng Qi and Xia Wan. The second was Huang Shelley and Tao Pian. Jiang Wang defeated Xiang Bei, but in terms of speed of ending the battle, ranked third. Of course, in terms of importance, the Battle of Qi and Chu in Tianjiao was undoubtedly far more significant than any other battle. Deng Qi didn't miss Jiang Wang's sharp stance. He also heard Su Xianqian's hoarse shout. Under the thick bronze mask, no one could see his expression. For some reason, the Battle of Tianjiao, which had the highest standards in the world, reminded him of the competition in that small city a few years ago. That was the Three Cities Dao debate. At that time, he only wanted to muddle along and wait for death. He did not have much hope in anything. He hired more than 10 big men to shout slogans for Third Brother Jiang outside the arena. They even set up 2 big flags, spending money to hire someone to inscribe these words. Compared to this high forehead, who knew how high the standard of a broken gong voice was. At that time, Third Brother Jiang was also fighting for first place. The weight of the 2 champions was naturally as different as heaven and earth. There was no room for comparison. But what was strange was that the person standing on the stage was still the same person. The person he was looking at was still the same person. This was really good, but also really sad. The good thing was that he was still around. He was still him. The sad thing was, of those people back then, those interesting, troublesome, annoying, lively, and all kinds of people, only these 2 people standing on the martial arts arena were left. Even Uncle Deng, who had escaped from Maplewood City, was no longer around. At that time, at this moment, it was really like a dream. At that time, he was smiling and watching from below the stage, only treating it as a game. Even for Third Brother Jiang at that time, that competition was related to his future and fate at this moment. He also stood on the stage and felt the weight of the stage. He knew how he came to this martial arts stage, so he could understand how the resolute and brave Third Brother Jiang had come to this stage. It was too difficult. Zhao Ruqing, who changed his name to Deng Qi, couldn't help but think. Did anyone know how difficult it was for him? Now, he quietly looked at the green-robed figure. He wanted to cry and laugh. There was no need to cry anymore. He wanted to laugh because Third Brother Jiang was very good now. He was very promising and not worse than anyone else. More importantly, he had found a new future and made new friends. When he won, there were people who cheered for him. When he lost, there were people who comforted him. This was really good. Zhao Ruqing was silent. He had all his thoughts under the cold bronze mask. When he saw that Jiang Wang's gaze seemed to be moving over, he immediately looked away as if nothing had happened and looked at the last battle on the stage. Gazes had weight, and after the power of his divine soul continued to strengthen, and he cultivated the eye of Qianyang, Jiang Wang could already feel the weight. Therefore, although the Tianjiao of Mu turned his head calmly and naturally, Jiang Wang could still feel his gaze. It was just that he didn't know if that highly focused gaze that didn't relax for a moment was observing his opponent, or hope was the source of pain. But if there was no hope, then how could he continue his life after walking out of the abyss? Jiang Wang didn't let himself think about it, but he couldn't help but think about it. In the end, he had ended the battle, defeated the strong opponent, and obtained a place in the top 4. His mind was temporarily relaxed. That was why there was such unrealistic torture. He also looked at the last battle on the stage. He focused his mind on the battle and carefully observed his opponent. That was the advantage of being the first to win. It was impossible for him not to be confident. As for other things, he would wait until after the competition to verify them. In the top 4 battles, the only one that continued was Qin Zhizhen of Qin against Yong Beigongke. It was reasonable to say that this battle was the one that people thought would end the fastest before the competition. There was no other reason. Yang's strength had long been recognized by other countries after the death of the Emperor Emeritus and repeated defeats in foreign wars. Not to mention Xia. Not many people felt that Yong was stronger than Shui country, which was locked in an extremely cold place. Although they had the support of the Mahis sect, and Yong was in the midst of a great transformation, the results hadn't been seen yet, and Qin was undoubtedly the hegemon. In the previous battle of the Outer Tower, gone Chong, and had stopped in the top 8. But in the battle with Do Zhao, he had also shown his powerful strength. Moreover, he was only 19 years old. Denial and mental travel were very powerful magical powers. He had also mastered the Karma Saber technique to perfection. His talent was impeccable. Then, in the inner mansion, Qin Zhizhen, who was also from the Great Qin Empire, definitely wouldn't have to expend so much effort to fight Tian Jiaoyou. But seeing this battle, one could understand why. On the field, Bei Gongku was displaying very powerful killing techniques. Holding two swords, he came and went like lightning. His sword aura was so strong that it enveloped the entire training field. Of course, this wasn't the reason the battle could last so long. The reason was Qin Zhizhen. He stood there like a silent reef. He didn't say a word and didn't have any expression. He just punched, and punched. When the sword came, he punched. When the person came, he punched. When the Dao technique came, he punched. From beginning to end, he stood there without moving a step. He only defended and didn't attack. It was as if he was determined to let his opponent show off. This was too arrogant. At the Yellow River Conference, who wasn't Tianjiao? Standing on the stage was nothing more than fighting for victory. Giving the opponent a chance to show off was usually something that happened when a senior gave pointers to a junior or a master gave pointers to a disciple. It wasn't as if a hegemon had never fallen off the chariot halfway. If Xiang Beixing did this, it would be very consistent with his usual arrogant image. But the person who did this was Qin Zhizhen. No ridicule or contempt could be seen on his face. He only silently punched out with his fists at an almost constant speed and received all the attacks. He also received all the attention. Chapter 1158. Everyone could see that in this battle, Bei Gongku had no chance at all, especially the spectators who had been watching this battle from the beginning. Some are already tired of watching, because from beginning to end, Qin Zhizhen's fists seemed to be the same. Although Bei Gongku's attacks were colorful, the result was always the same. The repeated scene had appeared too many times, and the ending was already predetermined. So why wasn't it over yet? Supernatural powers, secret techniques, sword techniques. Bei Gongku had already shown everything he could, but he still couldn't break through Qin Zhizhen's simple fists. But Qin Zhizhen had no intention of ending the battle. Bei Gongku also had no intention of giving up. It seemed that as long as Bei Gongku could always show something new, Qin Zhizhen was willing to defend forever. It seemed that as long as the battle wasn't really over, Bei Gongku could keep fighting. These two people actually had a strange kind of tacit understanding. Many spectators were bored. But Huang Sheli, Deng Qi, and Jiang Wang, the three people from Tianjiao who had decided on the top 4 spots, were watching more and more seriously. Those who weren't strong enough saw the same fists. But the real strong could be seen in Qin Zhizhen's fists. He saw the terror that was constant and unchanging. Thousands of moves and tens of thousands of techniques, broken by one punch. From beginning to end, Qin Zhizhen's feet didn't move a single step, and the strength of his fists didn't increase by a bit. How precise was his judgment? How terrifying was his control? This was definitely a top-notch performance. Time seemed to have passed for a long time, but also seemed to have only passed for a moment. The former was because this scene continued, and it continued to make people anxious. The latter was because from beginning to now, this battle didn't seem to have changed. And Qin Zhizhen finally opened his mouth. "Your sword is slow," he said. He seemed to have finally lost his patience. At this moment, Bei Gongku just happened to leap over, and the two swords crossed and slashed. Clang! The intersecting sword edges just happened to cut the fist. "Yes," Bei Gongku said. His hands separated, and the two swords were pulled out. The two swords were pulled diagonally across the steel-like fist. It made an ear-piercing, sharp sound. A change happened at this moment. Boom! It was the sword energy that had finally dissipated after failing time and time again in the previous continuous attacks. It was as if they had heard the drums of war and seen the flag of attack. The sword aura that seemed to be disorderly and scattered all over the place was instantly detonated. A terrifying sword whistling sound engulfed everyone's ears. Countless streaks of silver-white sword chi streaked across the sky. The sword energy whistled and transformed into a silver river. It was extremely dazzling as it traversed the vast sky and also poured down on Qin Jijin. Heaven and earth were all within the sword energy. Falling Milky Way sword chi array. Many people felt that Bai Gongku's earlier struggle was futile. No one would look forward to it, and they would even find it boring. However, he was probably the only one who never gave up on the possibility of victory. Amidst the seemingly futile attacks, there were traces of sword chi hidden within them. Finally, at this moment, he unleashed his strongest attack so far. Using the sword chi to form a sword formation, it was as if the Milky Way was pouring down, covering the mortal world. If it wasn't for the fact that his strength had already started to weaken, he might have been able to condense even more sword chi and make this eruption even stronger and more perfect. This was an extremely beautiful scene. This dazzling and terrifying killing technique instantly silenced the entire audience. No one would have thought that Bai Gongku, who had already displayed his remarkable abilities and used his secret techniques, and was blocked by Qin Jijin's iron fist time and time again, still had such a terrifying killing technique. The power of this falling Milky Way sword chi formation was even close to North Xiang's 8 Desolation, no return halberd technique activated by the tyrannical body of Thief. However, Qin Jijin, who had suddenly faced this move, had been defending for too long with an almost constant and limited power. How could he react in time? How could he receive it? If the roaring, falling Milky Way sword chi formation was compared to a silver dragon, then the black-clothed and bare-fisted Qin Jijin was like an ant facing the dragon. Because this eruption was too sudden, it was very difficult for him to react in time. However, at this moment, everyone suddenly saw that a light source suddenly lit up in Qin Jijin's body that was as hard as a reef. 1, 2, 3, 5. Heaven's sanctum! Someone in the spectator stand stood up and exclaimed, "Another heaven's sanctum!" The spectators really couldn't hide their emotions. The current perfected person could see the light of the remarkable abilities in the body of a cultivator. Often, they could discover at a glance how many remarkable abilities this person had. However, if there was another perfected person helping to cover it up, then even a powerhouse of the insightful truth realm would not be able to detect it. Almost every Tianjiao who came to the Yellow River meeting to participate in the battle had no shortage of powerhouses to help cover it up. In all the past records of the Qin state, Qin Jijin had never shown more than 2 remarkable abilities. Therefore, no one knew beforehand that there was a peerless Tianjiao with a heaven's sanctum hidden in this Yellow River meeting. Until this moment. At this moment, his 5 prefectures were shining at the same time, and the light of 5 remarkable abilities reappeared on the river viewing platform. People couldn't help but cast their eyes on Yung Ganzuin in the preparation area. Cultivators with remarkable abilities were already rare. They were almost at a different level from ordinary intermansion cultivators. They often enjoyed the title of genius. Cultivators of the Heaven's Sanctum were rare since ancient times. This year's 2 cultivators of the Heaven's Sanctum together on the river viewing platform was destined to be a wonderful stroke in the history books. But Yung Genzuin just quietly looked at the martial arts practice platform, watching very attentively. He was a little surprised by Qin Jijin's performance, but that was all. His pride was not because he had a Heaven's Sanctum, but because he was Yung Genzuin on the martial arts practice platform, under the 5 prefectures shining at the same time. Qin Jijin in black clothes still punched out. The light of the 5 remarkable abilities entangled together and crashed into the Sword Chi Galaxy. The bright Sword Chi Galaxy crashed into Qin Jijin's fist wrapped in the light of the 5 remarkable abilities, like a torrent crashing into a reef. The reef was motionless. The torrent separated and went away. The mighty Milky Way poured toward Qin Jijin. The sword chi splashed like waves and did not stain his clothes at all. It was like bathing in the Milky Way. Strong, too strong, so strong that it was terrifying, so strong that it made people despair. It seemed that no matter what the opponent did, no matter how hard they tried, they could not break that eternal fist at all. The falling Milky Way sword chi array was blasted open, and Qin Jijin praised, "Good sword array." He said with expectation, "Do you have any stronger means? Feel free to use them." Bei Gongke held his two swords upside down, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. He had used up too much energy, and his control of his body had weakened too much. He could not even control his sweat, but he panted heavily. Stronger, I can. He gritted his teeth and held his two swords tightly. But Qin Jijin looked at him and shook his head. "Looks like you don't have any more." His previous expectation was very tolerant, but his current shake of the head was particularly ruthless. But tolerance or ruthlessness was not actually him. He only looked forward to a more peak battle experience. If Bei Gongke could give it, he would get it patience. If Bei Gongke could not, he would end it. It was that simple. After shaking his head, he took a step forward. With one step forward, he was already facing Bei Gongke. What greeted his face was a simple punch. Boom! When Qin Jijin's fist touched Bei Gongke's abdomen, a clear light had already enveloped Bei Gongke. It also blocked the fist wrapped in the light of the 5 remarkable abilities. But Bei Gongke still spat out a mouthful of blood, and a bulging fist mark appeared on his back and front. It was not that Yu Qian's clear light could not block this punch, but that before Yu Qian made his move, the injury had already occurred. If he had not made his move at this time, Bei Gongke would already be dead. Chapter 1159. Without any suspense, Qin Jijin won the final battle of the Inner Mansion Arena. Although the result was without suspense, the process brought about many surprises or shocks. Bei Gongke truly lived up to Bei Gongyu's reputation and the expectations of the state of Yo. His tenacity and strength were enough to move people. His final detonation of the falling Milky Way sword chi formation made people unable to underestimate him. What truly deserved the attention of all was, of course, Qin Jijin's 5 prefectures glorious together. First, there was the 9-year-old Ganchong, and now there was Qin Jijin, who possessed the Heavenly Palace. The Tianjiao of the Great Qin didn't lose out to anyone in the slightest. People couldn't help but wonder how terrifying Huang Budong, who looked like a little old man and was the number 130 in the state of Qin, would be when he displayed his strength. This Yellow River meeting was worthy of its reputation as a storm. People were thinking, or perhaps anticipating, a question. The Heavenly Palace cultivator, Yung Gunzuin, was accompanied by the invincible Do Zhao. Each was outstanding. Who could contend with Qin Jijin, who also displayed the Heavenly Palace? At this point, the top 4 of the Inner Mansion Arena had been determined. According to the order of victory and defeat, the order was Deng Qi of Mu, Huang Shelley of Jing, Zhang Wang of Qi, and Qin Jijin of the state of Qin. After Yu Qian announced the final results, people naturally went to carry the losers away for treatment. The top 4 of the Inner Mansion Arena, Tianjiao, also walked off the stage. The 4 martial arts arenas merged into one with a roar. The next semifinals would be held on this martial arts practice stage. Yu Qian stretched out his hand and spread open the light screen to determine the battle list. Shining on it were the names of the 4 strongest Inner Mansion cultivators in the world, Tianjiao. Yes, in the Inner Mansion realm, they were the strongest in the world. Of course, the order of battle was important. For example, Do Zhao and Yung Gunzuin had almost perished together in the semifinals, resulting in this year's Outer Mansion Arena having no champion. For example, if Yin Xiaofei had a powerful country behind him, he might not be afraid of the rumors and could easily become the champion. In the battles in the Inner Mansion field, the strongest performers so far were, of course, Qin Jijin of the Qin state and Zhang Wang of the Qi state. The former was the peerless Tianjiao, who had 5 prefectures at the same time. while the latter had defeated North Xiang, who was almost invincible. The Mu Nation's Deng Qi had many killing techniques, so they were unfathomable. The Jing Nation's Yellow Saraira easily crushed his opponent without much effort. However, based on their current performance, they were indeed inferior to the previous two. The strong needed to be complemented by the strong. Fighting against the weak, there was no way he could display his elegance. Only the Tianjiao Gathering of Nations could allow so many people from Tianjiao to display their strength. Normally, Tianjiao, the #1 country in the world, would rarely have the opportunity to display their full strength. As an audience, it was also very interesting to observe the expressions of the 4 Tianjiao. Qin Jijin was still as silent as a reef, as if it didn't matter who he faced. As a cultivator of the heavenly abode, he certainly had the qualifications to do so. Deng Qi was wearing a bronze mask, so his expression couldn't be seen. However, his body was in a very relaxed state, without the slightest hint of nervousness. From this, one could roughly see the confidence in his heart. Huang Saraira looked at Jiang Wang confidently. It wasn't clear whether he particularly valued this opponent, whether he was observing or provoking him. Jiang Wang, on the other hand, was calm and indifferent from beginning to end. He even nodded at Huang Saraira, as if they had reached some kind of agreement. The top 4 of the inner mansion were really interesting. Even though Qin Jijin had already displayed the posture of having 5 prefectures at the same time, at least in terms of momentum, none of the Tianjiao were weak. On the contrary, each one of them was upright and confident. Yung Gunzuin of the outer mansion had already demonstrated how terrifying a cultivator of the heavenly abode could be. However, the Tianjiao in the inner mansion were all full of energy. Could it be that another Do Zhao would appear? Who knew if they were just putting up a strong front? Everyone held their breaths in anticipation, waiting for the final result on the light screen. When it was confirmed, the spectator stands were in an uproar. Deng Qi of the Mu Kingdom versus Huang Saraira of the Jing Kingdom. Jiang Wang of the Qi Kingdom versus Qin Jijin of the Qin Kingdom. It was as if the Battle of Tianjiao in the outer mansion had been repeated. In the previous rounds of battle, the 2 strongest Tianjiao had met in advance again, no matter if people were looking forward to it, dissatisfied, or happy. The list had been set, and no one could change it. According to the order displayed on the light screen, the semifinals of the inner mansion of the Yellow River meeting would start first with the Battle of Tianjiao of the Jing Kingdom. Qin Jijin turned directly and returned to the preparation area. Jiang Wang took a deep look at Deng Qi, then stepped back a few steps and stood still. He didn't mean to return to the Qi preparation area. It was clear that he was going to watch the battle below the stage. Qin Jijin and Jiang Wang in this battle were different from the choices of Do Zhao and Yung Genzuan in the outer mansion. At that time, the 2 peerless Tianjiao in the outer mansion had already shown extraordinary strength and regarded each other as their biggest opponent. Therefore, they seized every moment to recover. They directly meditated under the martial arts arena. The current Qin Jijin didn't consume any energy at all. Although Jiang Wang fought fiercely with North Xiang, he had the upper hand from the battle of the Tongtian Palace to the battle outside the inner mansion. With his powerful divine soul power and vigorous Tao energy reserves, it was easy to make up for the loss. Relatively speaking, he wanted to watch the battle at a close distance. One was Huang Shelley, who had made an appointment with him early on, and the other was Deng Qi, who made him extremely curious and faintly expectant. There should be an answer to that slim hope, presumably in front of Huang Shelley, who had 4 supernatural powers. Everyone had to fight with all their strength. It was impossible to hold back. In such a battle, Jiang Wang didn't want to miss any details. Zhao Ruqing, who used the pseudonym Deng Qi, of course noticed Jiang Wang's attention, but he was unmoved. Today was the first step in his decision to return the gift. The gift he wanted to return the gift was too big, and the object he wanted to return the gift to was too big. He didn't want to involve the sincere and determined third brother Jiang. Therefore, he was particularly alienated. In fact, when third brother Jiang asked him if they knew each other, how could he not hear the trembling and expectation in that question? How could he not want to imitate Tiger Dew's tone and say loudly, "Of course I know you. I'll know you even if you're burned to ashes." But he couldn't. Everyone in the world had their own path, and most of the time, they could only walk on their own. He stepped onto the martial arts arena and stood still. Zhao Ruqing looked at his opponent quietly. At this point, the only thought in his mind was to win. Facing Tianjiao, who represented the overlord state, to fight at the viewing river platform. If he still had thoughts other than winning in his mind, no matter if he wanted to hide his traces or something else, he would have no chance of winning. The two people who were also standing on the martial arts arena had completely different moods. Compared with Zhao Ruqing, Huang Shelley was obviously more relaxed. She stepped onto the martial arts arena and first looked at Yilan, the first beauty of the Chu state. Good, he's paying attention to me. Then, she looked at Yung Gunzuin, who was on the preparation area of Qi. Good, he's paying attention to me. Then, she also looked at Jiang Wang, who was standing still under the martial arts arena. Good, he's also paying attention to me. Then, it was time for the people of Shui country to express their condolences. Huang Shelley suddenly turned back and stared at Zhao Ruqing. Boy, you're dead. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.